Welcome to the podcast. It's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist. The Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee. We have with us Squid Bikes, Ivy Audrain.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi, good. our head coach, Chad Zimmerman.
Hi, everyone.
And our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
Nate.
I feel like I got here a little early.
Interesting, because I kind of feel like the exact opposite. But hey, you know what? We're here. I like it.
There was a lot of time.
Yeah.
It was at least more 45 seconds.
It's good to have you, Nate. I'm excited to, well, first of all, things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about sprinting, some tactics, but also like some other details about sprinting and cadence, and maybe the thing that you're missing and why your sprinting power isn't so high and why your sprinting isn't effective. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about it is. Ooh, okay.
I'm not going to, that's open loop. Let's go.
There we go. Excessive sugar. What happens when you take in too much sugar and how you can change that. Active recovery versus passive recovery and more. But first, Nate, we have to talk about Tahoe Trail 100 because Ivy and I are doing this in 2 weeks. We are the relay team where I don't know who. Ivy, have you looked at the registration list? I haven't. I should see.
No, don't do that.
Find who's okay.
Well, the team that does really well there is Levi Leipheimer and his girlfriend.
They're no longer
going to race
together.
Oh,
they're not. Well, okay. Yeah.
Romantically together.
She moved. So, she's not in this region, but Levi might show up with his partner. I don't know. Cause she also races the current one. I don't know, but I imagine Levi will be there. Friend of the podcast. Good dude. But I don't know, man. Ivy, what are your
competition though?
Yeah, I know. That's some seriously stiff competition. It's funny because like Alex Wild, of course, those know him on the podcast. Levi almost stays with Alex at Tahoe Trail 100. Like,
what do you mean?
Like he's basically
like outside his door.
No, it's a good joke. No, like he holds his pace. Like,
oh, I gotcha.
Yeah, like he's so fast. He's still so fast. So we'll see if he races. It would be cool. But Ivy, you and I could do pretty darn well. You're fast right now. I think
Thanks.
You just saw. I saw on
always.
Instagram. Oh, yes, it's true. But you're getting the reason I say right now is because I just saw on Instagram the other day that I think it was AI FTP detection, so that you had a higher FTP. Was that right?
Sure was. Yeah. No testing ever.
Hooray. What is it, Ivy? What'd you go from and what are you?
254 right now. I think I started the season at like 238 or something.
Ooh, that's a good increase.
Mm-hmm.
Heck yeah.
And I'm above 4 watts per kilo now, which is great.
Yay.
Ooh, that's awesome. So
we can humble brag sometimes, right? As a treat.
Yeah, of course. Nate, what do you, us two, we're getting ready to do the relay. I'm doing lap 1. Ivy's doing lap 2. That's correct, right, Ivy? I don't have that backwards. Okay. What suggestions do you have for us? You've done this race 1.5 times or 2 times before. I think you did like the 2-lap race 3 times. All right. What suggestions do you have for us? I've done it too, but this makes it more fun. Good conversation.
Okay. 100% John should go first because what happens at the very beginning. So it's at elevation, right? You start at like 7,000 feet. And how high do you go?
You start at 6,000 feet, and I think you go to somewhere just shy of 8,000 over the course of the lap. I could be wrong, but I think that's about right.
So that's 2,000 meters to almost 3,000, somewhere in there. So it's high. Mm-hmm. It's enough to like put down your power. And if you go above anaerobic, you'll feel it. And it starts at a ski resort. So at the beginning, it's really, really steep and everyone's bunched together and everyone goes so hard on that first climb. And there's a little flat section. And then there's another climb and a bunch of people decide they don't want to race anymore, but it's single track. And it can be very annoying. So if you pace the first climb correctly, you're going to be held up on like the second climb, the second big climb because of single track. And that is super annoying, but there's really not much to do about it. But then things stretch out and all of that. So John is fast enough and aggressive enough to get into a spot where he might even be with some of the people who actually do pace correctly, but also where you're at, John. I don't even know your fitness right now, but
AI FTP detection says that I'm at 314 or 315 right now, FTP. So and then my weight's like 153 yesterday. So
how does it feel?
I mean, I feel fast. I'm really tired though, because I haven't done like a concentrated block like this recently on the bike because I've been doing like less bike work and more just overall running, swimming, biking, and kind of just like carrying an even tide rather than really building. And it's tiring. Like I wake up in the morning, you all know this feeling. I wake up in the morning, I haven't done anything yet, but I just open my eyes and my legs feel like I just finished a workout. You know what I mean? Like it's that sort of like accumulating fatigue, but it's the last week of the build phase. And then, or my loading phase, I should say. And then I have a recovery week next week. So
I had that for 6 years, and I probably did too much. I did too much volume. Obviously, Chad had mentioned this a few times. Chad's like, that's not how it's supposed to work. And when I did less volume, I actually got faster. But John, so with the extra, like you have extra upper body mass because of swimming, correct?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And running too. Strangely, I feel like running has also kind of changed it. I don't know. I could be wrong.
I think you're wrong.
It's trunk. I guess what I should say is trunk. I'm not just saying core. Chest and arms. Yeah. Much more. Yeah.
And then what, I know Chad hates that term, so don't get me to
I don't. I just like the misuse of it. It's a fine term.
Yeah.
It's fine. John, do you find it's fine? Everything is fine.
It's fine.
Do you find that descending now with your swimming upper body strength is anything different?
Yeah, but I have to consciously use it because I've built habits to not use it over the years. I don't know if that makes sense, but like, I've found that like I have a like much greater ability now to be able to move the bike exactly where I want it in descending situations. And as a result, my speed threshold's higher. So like yesterday I found myself riding a trail that it's very familiar to me, but I was riding it so fast that I realized that like, hey, my like CPU is overcooked. I can't process visually what I'm seeing. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I got to the point where my vision hasn't leveled up to the speed because
scary as hell.
Yeah. I was going through some stuff and I was like, this is very reckless. I need to slow down. But I feel like I have a way higher speed threshold when I remind myself of the principles that we talk about in Lee's video, how to be a faster mountain biker. Check it out on our YouTube channel. And I get chest low and I'm hinged and I'm allowing that bike to freely move underneath me. It's super fast. It's still probably about 10% of the speed of Richie Rude, but hey, it's still really fast for me. So yeah, it's really cool.
Fast. No, it's really fast by just normal standards. It's pretty scary to watch.
Right?
Ivy and I rode the other day. It was really fun.
Yeesh. Yeah.
So Ivy, my whole career of like starting mountain biking, John was like the first, second, and 100th person I rode with. So I just thought that's how all mountain bikers rode. I'm like, that's how you got to ride. I'm like, I am horrible. Like I'm not as fast as John. So going back to the race, there's that part there. And then there's water hydration. Mm-hmm. Stations don't always have cold drinks. People can have done like backpack stuff there. And the second lap will be a lot hotter. It was going to start cold. Like it'll start in just probably above freezing, like 40s or something in there.
Yeah. Low 40s.
Yeah. So John will probably drop some stuff to Ivy at the beginning of the first climb because you do get cold. I would guess you'd have arm warmers and maybe a vest, and you would drop that where Ivy starts and just throw it to the side.
Yeah, then, I'm curious on your thoughts on hydration, Nate, and like I guess like carrying with me because they don't have like a special needs aid except for when I would finish my lap. So there's no point, like I can't really pick anything up. So part of me is thinking that 2 bottles would get me through because I think that a fast lap time, for those that are wondering, this is relevant because this is a Leadville qualifier. So if you ever want to do Leadville, you can do this race to improve your corral position, or you can do this race just to qualify for Leadville if you do really exceptionally well against everybody in your age group.
It's a big race.
But it is a big race. But Nate, a part of me thinks, so I should be able to get through with 2 bottles because I looked back at my lap times before and they were 2:20s. For my lap times, 2 hours and 20 minutes. And there's 2 laps to do the full thing. Ivy and I are relaying. So we're just doing 1 lap each. I'd like to think that was pretty evenly paced. I wasn't like going crazy hard. I think that I'd love to be able to do a 2:10. That would put me in rare air in terms of like fast lap times to be able to do a 2:10. But I'm torn between taking 2 bottles on my bike, like 2 shorter bottles, or between taking a hydration pack, because I can descend just fine with a hydration pack, but the speeds are high enough where I'm wondering if there's like an aero penalty to taking, even though that USWE is super slim. What would you do?
I think for you, John, because you go so fast and it's in the morning and you're not doing another lap, do 2 bottles. It will it will impact your recovery the next day and you feel awful. But that's fine, because you're just going for 2 laps, 2 hours, a little over that, and you're going to be done. And after though, there is that aid station at the very end too, before that last long climb, that you can grab extra water if you want. So if you're out of water by then, know that you can drink, what's it called? Never going to say it.
Ad hominem, I think.
Ad hominem.
Ad libitum.
Ad libitum. Ad hominem's like what's speaking.
Yes, silly me. Everyone is like yelling at whatever their car or whatever they're listening.
I knew what you were talking about from the minute you started to describe it, but I just wanted to let you dangle for a minute there.
We'll let the adults talk soon. But yeah, so I would use that last one as a emergency aid station and just go for 2. Ivy, so on your lap, when you start, you're going to have a lot of people. If John goes in at a 2:10, you're going to have some extremely fast people around you,
but not many people, right? Like she won't be like in a huge pack.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like it's mostly pretty fire roady, but there's one single track climb and one single track descent. And if someone's behind you, they should have gone faster. They're both like a little bit slower, but you guys are racing. And I know some people, this is what I've heard. I'm not a woman, I don't know, but sometimes men can be pretty aggressive and, especially like, hey, you should get out of my way. And sometimes people just do it. But if you're racing at the front and you guys are fast, like, yeah, I was like, that's not me.
This happens in cross all the time too, and there are multiple categories on the course at the same time. And generally my rule is if you're in like the top 3, but someone is trying to like pass you, but you're racing for the win, they just have to wait, especially if they're just some like middle-ish pack bro. Sorry, we're racing for the win. You got to wait, bud.
That is
Nate,
go ahead.
On this too. The single track sections are pretty short. Like they're really not that long. But I also think that Ivy's skill level is going to be higher. I've ridden with Ivy quite a few times, and I've seen how she can rip. And I think that she'll be higher than a lot of the riders that will even be up there toward the front in terms of her descending skill. So
I'm just thinking about the climb, and Ivy will be on her first lap. They have that descent thing. She'll be fine. And I want to say too, in general, like I've been lapped on courses and I hear those like first place people come, I get off the trail right away because to Ivy's point, I'm not going to win. Like a couple seconds is no big deal. But when you are racing for the win, I think we should all support those people. And it might not be, they might be slower than you and racing for the win in their category. And that's something for us all to understand. They could be 60 plus. They could be a different gender. It could be anything. It could be a relay. So you might think, I don't know what you think, but just we should be aware of that and let those people try to win. And if you're racing for the win too, what do you guys think? That's kind of a jerk thing to say too. I'll come over the win. Get out of my way. I've had people do that.
I mean, usually you just say like leader, like it's just like leaders coming up behind you, when you're trying to make the pass. And usually by saying that, people are like, okay, we should let them go.
I've had some pros come up behind me who are racing for money for their paycheck and been incredibly gracious and nice. They're just like that, like totally calm, like, hey, leader coming in when you get a chance. And
no pressure.
Livelihood. No pressure. Yeah.
If you
enjoy
can.
Your race.
LOL.
That's
JK, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. So that's about it. And then enjoy. There's usually good food afterwards. Really good food.
Yeah. What I'm thinking of doing is after my lap, which I probably won't feel like doing this because it'll be an all out 2 hour and 10 minute effort. Like I want to finish that line and cross that line and have absolutely nothing left. Right.
Bring no bottles.
You're set up well. Yeah. Well, I'm actually thinking of doing a bottle and a half, so to speak, like filling one bottle a bit lower. And if I take in gels, I should be fine to be able to get through. I don't know. We'll see. Run the motor a little lean.
You think that extra half bottle is going to slow you down substantially?
Listen, Chad, ounces.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
If in your head it makes you feel faster, sure, that might be an argument I could get behind. But the weight, no.
This is horrible. It's
one thing.
You and Ivy are not gonna lose by like 4 seconds. Ivy will destroy them. Ivy, if you see somebody in the relay, and Ivy, you'll be able to tell too, because when people come in, you'll be able to see if there's any woman who came in before John, which I doubt there will be women come before John. And then you'll know if a woman actually passes you on course, that is your competition, or it is a solo woman. It could be either way.
Yeah.
But if a solo woman to pass you on course would be pretty impressive, because then that means they would be. Do any women do that at like 5'10"? I know they're a woman as fast as John, but it's pretty it's rare in the world.
Yeah, not a lot of like top pro athletes typically show up to this. There's a handful for sure, but it's not like what we see at like a Lifetime Grand Prix, for example. So yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see, but my thought is, even though it probably won't feel like this, Ivy, I might go because I can ride over to the other like aid station or anything else. I could have like a bottle for you, or I could do anything else. Like if, support the teammate, it could be good.
What do you get
like
hydration?
You could fly light with like one bottle. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, maybe maybe I should take this more seriously. I'm pretty relaxed about it. Like, yeah, I'll just have a couple of big bottles. It'll be fine.
That's better. It gets, at elevation too, you lose water easier. Mm-hmm. That race is known for it, that like the second lap, that last climb, for being
hot,
feeling incredibly hot. I would do extra water for you, Ivy.
And the idea of like missing a feed or like missing John somehow and not having water stresses me out. So I'll just carry no water. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 2 big bottles. I remember when I did it, it's not the last climb, Nate. It's like the second to last climb, and it's kind of stair steppy. I don't know if you remember that one.
I do.
That one cooked me on the last lap. It was so hot and the speed's really low, and you typically have a tailwind up the climb and it's really steep. So that just means that you get 0 evaporative cooling and your body temperature just ratchets up. It was really, really hot.
So bottle and a half, huh? That's all.
I mean, I'll be going early in the morning, not second lap. I don't know. Look, like it would not be me if I wasn't looking for every little advantage, right? That's the point. I like every optimizing. Yeah.
I would say, Chad, do you call this every advantage or every like silly advantage, or what would you call it?
Foolish.
Just overthinking. I think there's too much thought going into things that aren't going to have that big of a consequence.
Chad, if we don't overthink things, there's a chance we could underthink things. So we err on the side of overthinking. This is how we work.
I'm coming around to this logic. There are things I've learned over time. I used to think Nate overplanned his nutrition and hydration, and I've long since learned that it's absolutely worth the time invested. And there are things that do make sense to me. This is not amongst them, but I support you in your decision.
We should, even if you make bad decisions.
That's true. He's the parent.
Thanks, Chad. Yeah, I was just gonna say, Chad, that was a wonderful dad position. Thank you. Yeah, it felt great. Okay, so for the bike, I'm running the Epic. I think, Nate, did you run your brain fully on that course in the back?
No, I think I had like 1 click off or something, or 1 click from full.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's probably the move for the course. That way, if there's any sort of bumpy stuff, I can maintain a bit more momentum. And then, and I'm running Aspens 2.4s, and I'm running inserts. I always see people say like, you don't need inserts because there's not big rocks. Inserts make your bike handle better too. That's the sweet part. So,
but there's not much handling.
Inserts. No, but
it's fast fire road.
That's the exact reason why I want them. So in fast fire road sections, I feel like traction's the limiter, right? And it's really sketchy because if you lose traction, it's really gone all in 1 second and there's no wiggle room. So that's why I like to have a tire that gives me much more contact patch, or like much more forgiveness. And that's what you get with inserts. Like you feel like you're cheating. It's like the traction is so strong compared to what you get when you aren't running them, because you can run a bit lower pressure. It's profound. Makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. So is the race next weekend?
Weekend after next. And speaking of that, I need to look at the calendar here, but Ivy, I think that we should announce that we're going to pre-ride. And if anybody's listening to this and they want to come pre-ride the course with us, they should do it. Alex Wild, I think, is also going to join. As of now, I think that's tentative, but I believe that's the case. It's July 8th, Friday, July 8th, right, Ivy?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds horrible. Like, right, like you guys are superhuman. It's like, you want to ride with 3 superhumans on this really hard course, and they're just going to be talking to you, and they're like, I would bring an e-bike and ride with you guys. That's what you like. That actually sounds pretty good, an e-bike with you 3. But yeah, these are 3 very fast people. But they would.
Pre-ride is chill. Pre-ride is chill though. Like we're going to take our time to,
Yeah. Sometimes superhumans don't realize that, like, some of us, like up there, like 2.5 would be pushing it, because if you're 2.75 and your elevation, 2.5 is threshold, right?
You're talking
so this
watts
is
per
like
kilo, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. join, and they will slow down and stuff, but just
we'll chill, we'll recollect, we'll analyze, we'll overthink. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't want to come join me and overthink it. But yeah, it'll be a chill ride Friday, the 8th. And Ivy, we were planning this on the fly. What do you say to 9 a.m. start?
Sure. Sounds great.
That way we get some of the heat, but not a whole lot. Since we're going to be carrying a slower pace, we'll get to feel what the heat feels like on the second lap there. So 9 a.m. we'll meet at the gondola there in the village at North Star. That sounds super fancy, but that's where we'll meet. And then we'll head up. So Friday, July 8th, 9 a.m. at the gondola. If you want to do a lap of the course, we're not going to do 2 laps, just do 1 lap. So yeah, it'll be good times. Yeah, I'm excited for it. If you are listening to this right now, and you're planning on doing Tahoe Trail 100, let us know in the YouTube comments if you're joining us there. And otherwise, share this out with your friends. Let them know that you're going to join us for a pre-ride. It'll be good to have you. I'll see if I can even pull out, I don't think he's doing it, but our friend Derek Teal too, Dialed Health. It'd be fun to have him join us. He's just a great guy, and he lives close. So,
and Dialed Health has some really good reels about he just changed his format. It's like, hey, you have neck problems on the bike, you have this problem on the bike, and it shows some PT you can do. It's amazing. They're getting how many views?
He got one that was darn near 1 million, I think. It's fantastic. Exactly.
Very good content. So it's very worth to follow. Dialed Health on Instagram.
Yeah.
And he knows what he's doing too.
Training. Yes. Yeah. For those that don't know, he was a pro downhill racer. Good one. He rode for Yeti. He was that good. He was a junior, and Yeti picked him up because he had so much promise. So that's really good. And this is back when Yeti was full on in downhill. So with Jared Graves, and he was racing downhill back in the day. And then he raced pro enduro for a while. And then he pursued his career in becoming a trainer. He was a trainer at Equinox down in Santa Monica for a long time, which for those who don't know, that's a very prestigious, solid gym. And then he now trains cyclists for strength training, and it's awesome. And he uses TrainerRoad every single day, basically 5 days a week. And he does not miss. He's a great follow. Good example. So good guy. Okay. Chad, first I'm going to read Adam's submission, and he submitted this question / just thing at trainerroad.com/podcast. And you can do that too. If you have any questions, go do that. It says, not a question, but just wanted to say thanks. I rode 568 kilometers out, or a 568 kilometer Audax yesterday. I hope that's how you say it. Am I pronouncing that wrong, Ivy, Chad, Nate? I think it's Audax. What he wrote here isn't the correct word.
It's been spell corrected. I was going to delete it because I thought that's just a terrible sentence. But no, I didn't change it.
Some people call it Audax. Yeah, Audax or Audax.
It's a long day.
And
is that? I'm
sorry. Yeah, no, more than that. Over 13,000 feet of climbing at an average of 18.6 miles per hour. That is fast. 18.6 miles per hour. And I know that's a lot distance, but that's a good high speed to hold throughout that long of a ride. That's super impressive. To prepare, I relied on my TrainerRoad adaptive training plan, and wow, it works brilliantly. For anyone who doubts whether focused high intensity training can build endurance, I say, trust the plan and listen to the podcast for fueling, rest, and hydration tips. Thanks, TrainerRoad, from Adam. There we go.
Good job, Adam. Wow.
Yeah. Way to go. Right.
Well done.
A great example of structured interval training with TrainerRoad, working for long stuff, not just short stuff. It's pretty cool. Okay, Brian, I've heard a few discussions on the obvious advantages of maintaining power whilst riding downhill, but wondered if there's been any research on whether taking the opportunity to spin quicker but keep consistent power might help clear the legs and potentially aid recovery for the length of the downhill before hitting the next flat or hilly section of road or trail, when cadence will inevitably reduce again. So this Brian's question it's akin to the same thing of should I spin between my work intervals, right? When I'm training, right? I mean, that's basically what we're doing here. It's just thinking of the mountains, the ups and downs as your rest and work intervals.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much along the same lines as the discussion we had a couple podcasts back, and I will touch on that. He asks if there's research, and if there is, I couldn't find it. It's really hard to find studies looking at long efforts followed by long recoveries, hill climb followed by a long descent. So what follows does require some extrapolation, bit of leeway, but I do think the takeaways are sound. The question, as I see it, Brian, is will spinning during the downhills clear legs, and in doing so, aid your recovery? So that previous podcast where we talked about recovery between intervals was Ask Cycling Coach 365. And I mentioned a study in it by Krustrup and Bangsbo in 2006, where soccer players' sprint performance was analyzed during the course of what they termed 3 friendly games. And they looked at blood glucose, plasma, free fatty acids, so just the fat in your blood, muscle lactate, blood lactate, and they did this all via biopsy. And then they assessed performance via their sprint times. And the findings from that are relevant to this discussion right here, as far as spinning during the downhills to facilitate your recovery, is that first off, muscle lactate wasn't correlated with blood lactate. And it's all too common in studies where we see this association, but I wonder if measuring blood lactate to draw conclusions regarding muscle goings on is really the right way to go about it. Because I think it's, some of those takeaways can be a bit misleading. There's a lot of assumption going on there. Secondly, they noted that the decline in sprint performance during the games was not correlated with muscle lactate, nor muscle pH, nor total glycogen content even, which is very interesting. What I took from that is that the link between these variables and performance wasn't really supported, at least not in this study.
Chad, this flies in the face of the very common thing of like, you got to spin to get the lactate out of your legs or get the lactic acid out of your legs.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite commentator comments. Whenever they say that, I kind of check out. I was like, oh, okay, so you don't really understand physiology. You're super, looking at you, Robbie McEwen, astute bike racer, and your observations are amazing. You're a great host, but you don't understand physiology. So please stop. But whatever, it's a minor gripe. So another observation was that blood lactate was deemed as a poor indicator of muscle lactate. And yes, this is in soccer play match, but just consider the similarities between soccer players or soccer play, I guess I should say, criteriums, cross-country mountain bike, short track mountain bike, anything where we're doing a whole lot of on-off efforts where the offs aren't really off, where they're all high repetition and all high intensity. So with this in mind, I really have to wonder if analysis of blood lactate, blood pH, hydrogen, acidity, all those things, or muscle lactate, pH, acidity, hydrogen, whatever, is actually a useful research finding when we're investigating recovery and performance. Can blood lactate and pH accurately assess the rates of recovery in the muscle? I mean, whatever we derive from what we're seeing in the blood, is that still representative of what's going on in the muscle? So maybe my broader question is, are these common analysis variables even telling us what we think? Because the author's stance in this particular paper was that blood lactate and blood pH may not be reliable in this context, in the context of repeated intense exercise, as in not steady state exercise, wherein you see low blood lactate, low muscle lactate, and a high synchronization between the two. There it's useful. Here, maybe not so much. But anyway, my overall takeaway, and it definitely aligns with theirs, is that clearing the lactate and reducing muscle or blood pH is probably not our aim when we're choosing to spin or not spin downhill. Rather, the aim should be to maintain performance, to reduce RPE, to reduce fatigue, to increase motivation. Okay. So more along those lines, and I think this is one of the studies that you pointed out, Jonathan. You found a couple that were very tied to this, and I looked into both of them, and they both had relevant findings. So this one in particular was 2014 by Lopez and colleagues, and they looked at passive recovery versus active recovery and its effect on power output. And they did it over 6 Wingate tests, which is basically just a 30-second all-out effort. And then in between them, there was 4 minutes recovery, and it was either performed passively or actively. If it was done actively, it was just done at 1.1 watts per kilo. So if you're a 75 kilo rider, 165 pound rider, we're talking around 80 watts. So very little effort, just turning the legs over. So this is not the steady power that Brian's describing, but it's interesting because the findings revealed little difference between the fatigue index, which is a measure of fatigue across the sprints, little difference in total accumulated work, which was the work across all sprints totaled. So there was really no significant effects on fatigue or work performed. The takeaway at this point being that at least with sprints, fatigue and work may not be impacted. But in the performance context, the active recoveries actually led to a lower peak power output in that second sprint, but greater average peak power output in later sprints, in particular the 5th and 6th sprints. So what the authors took from this was that the passive recovery is the way to go if you're only going to do a couple sprints, but that's just not a very likely scenario. And it's interesting, this also holds true for like 15-15s. Do a couple 15-15s in a row and you see the same decline, but it only happens twice unless you do active recovery and leads to higher, but just for 2. So the author's second takeaway was that active recovery maintains better average power when you're doing several repeated sprints, and this holds far greater real world applicability. And this was attributable, at least by their view, and I think really anyone who understands physiology, because of the increased aerobic contributions to their power production. So the important point here is that anytime we can increase that aerobic contribution, then there's less toll on the anaerobic stores.
Makes sense.
And yeah, it does, right? And yes, we're looking at sprints or really high intensity efforts, but keeping that aerobic contribution elevated can be worth attention. It's not exactly to Brian's question, but if you think of short explosive rollers, I think that the context definitely carries. And it's also important when we're just talking about endurance training and endurance training adaptations. For example, when we want to maximize workout power output during something like sprint intensity training or similar high intensity on-off intervals, active recovery is likely the way to go. So while this may not directly be evident in hill climbs followed by long or longish descents, it at least opens our eyes to the potential of anaerobic fuel sparing when the aerobic system is primed. So in this case, I think if nothing else, Brian, maybe start spinning your legs toward the end of the descent.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final, go ahead.
No, please, Chad, continue.
Okay, I just have one more study. And this one is 2017, Albandian and colleagues, and they looked at active recovery between intervals, how it reduced blood lactate while improving subsequent exercise performance in trained men. So the objective of this study was if enhanced performance due to active recovery was related with blood lactate and blood pH, things you're ostensibly clearing when you're spinning on a downhill. So we already understand that active recovery leads to improved sprint performance, at least past that second sprint. But they looked at blood lactate and blood pH following high intensity repeats where they did 30 seconds at a time at 90% of peak power output. So that'd be about 90% of what you do on a ramp test. And they separated by 4 minutes of rest. And that rest was either done passively or actively. If it was active, it was just 60% of FTP. So again, not a lot of work, just enough to keep things moving. And then they looked at performance by following the final 4-minute recovery with a 30-second wind gate. So they did these efforts, rested passively or actively, and then did one of those wind gates. And they looked at blood gases and lactate and pH. They also looked at peak and average power output during these subsequent wind gates. And what they found was with the active recovery, the blood pH was significantly higher, which you guess, it means it was less acidic. Blood lactate was significantly lower. Again, it cleared or really was absorbed, utilized in comparison to passive recovery. The wind gate performance was significantly higher when they actively recovered, both their peak power and their average power output. So if the following effort post-recovery is going to be high intensity, I mean, maybe you're going to sprint like an idiot out of the bottom of the hill when everyone else is recovered, then active recovery for the win, right? And it kind of brings the study more in line with hill climbs, but it's still not an apples to apples comparison. Sadly, again, I can't find one, but again, excuses extrapolation, give me some leeway on these, what I consider educated guesses. Enhancing the aerobic contribution, especially in competition, seems like a good idea. It looks like it's something that's definitely positively impacted with performance. And also, since there aren't really any striking downsides to either form of recovery, I don't feel there's any wrong action to be pursued here. And it just leads me to my personal takeaway that this probably doesn't need to be overanalyzed. Base it on your experience. Whatever makes you feel better, whatever makes you perform better, do that. Don't overthink it.
Did it mention how much water we should put in our bottles while we're doing this? Trainer?
Probably. I probably glazed over that because I wasn't concerned with such insignificant minutia.
So that's a lot of weight. That's a lot of weight saved.
But so just what this says is when you're doing workouts inside, because sometimes it's hard to pedal downhill, especially when you're mountain biking. When you're doing workouts inside, pedal between in the rest periods.
Yeah. And we also determined from that last discussion that you just get a little extra mileage, for lack of a better description. I mean, your legs are still turning, you're still doing a little bit of work, still metabolizing energy aerobically, you're still reinforcing good movement patterns. I mean, there's stuff to be gained from moving rather than sitting passively on your bike.
It's so hard after a long descent to pedal again, like just inexperience, like it feels bad.
Totally. I was just
exactly right.
Ivy, you just did a bike packing trip with the rest of the Squid Bikes crew. You rode a lot, like it was big bike packing trip. I bet you came across this feeling of going down huge climbs and having to go back up and your legs just rejecting the whole idea of pedaling again.
Right. And so what Chad kind of mentioned about starting to pedal again before the base of the climb, even though it's downhill and a little tricky, I know for me, it was, beneficial to carry a little bit of speed into the base of the climb just to make it feel like less of here I go, I'm climbing again, but also so apart from the speed and moving quickly part, mentally, it was just really nice to not physically separate those efforts between I'm descending and now I'm climbing again, and now I'm descending again, and now I'm climbing again, to kind of use that rolling speed to work it into one continuous state of mind. Really mentally helped me with those super long, tough days.
Yeah, because that's like defeating when you're doing a long ride. So it's different when you can see your interval workout inside, and you know that you have 7 intervals or insert whatever number. But when you're riding outside on an unfamiliar loop and you think you're done, and then you get hit with another one, like imagine if on your TrainerRoad workout you just got hit with a surprise interval, like you get to do more. Like that would be super discouraging.
We have a couple masochists that ask for that. They're like,
I actually did that in bike classes. We used to have open-ended bike classes. I ran them for a couple of weeks. They were hugely unpopular, so I didn't do them anymore. But it was basically, we're going to do a certain amount of intervals and we're going to recover. I gave them the recovery duration, but they didn't know how many intervals they were going to have to do. And my point was, I want you to pace appropriately. They had a hard limit, and I had riders exceeding that hard limit all the time and wondering why they couldn't get through the workout. So it was like, I'm not going to tell you how many intervals today, because I want you to stay at that hard limit. And again, it was deflating. Nobody liked that format.
That happens really commonly though on races that you just don't know the course. Man, even when you do know the course, just sometimes you get race brain and you forget that, like, oh gosh, I have this to do still. And that can be really tough. So I like how you mentioned that, Ivy, how when you don't have this climb equals on and descend equals totally switched off mode, and you're just more like you're working your way through and you're keeping that momentum up and going through, then it's just kind of like your effort's constant, relatively speaking. And then like you're going to continue working through the whole thing. It does make it more manageable. That's that like kind of like go all in and then ease up thing just gets exhausting, even just psychologically.
Right. And not when racing, even when training and having a goal for those climbs. Sometimes turning it totally off and coasting and fully resting can take you out of a really good place where you're able to find a good pace in your climbing and training. And so it can benefit you if you're not racing too in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Good tips. We're going to get into, Nate, you got something?
I have to say this. Yes. Pedaling while descending can be a recipe for, huge crashes. Oh yeah. But just make sure, turning, just don't pedal. And have you guys ever clipped the pedal in a turn, like in a race?
Oh yeah.
It is scary. I've done it twice and I've saved it both times, but your rear wheel jumps like 4 feet and it's not good. And especially too, if you start pedaling, you might take that corner a little bit faster than normal, which means you lean a little bit more than normal. And then that's when it clips, where every other time when you go at a slower speed, not an issue. That's in the crits that I've done this in. It's like this corner can always pedal. And when I go solo by myself and I'm going really hard and I go 5-10 miles per hour, not 10, maybe 5 miles per hour faster, that's when I clip. So just be careful. Don't pedal downhill in corners unless you're I just wouldn't do it at all. Because especially if you're going, 30.
Asymmetric risk, right, Nate? Like when you think about it, you could probably ease up and not pedal for that one turn and you'll be okay. The upside of it is, sure, you might lose like a fraction of a second, like half of a bike length. The potential downside is catastrophic. It's not worth it.
It's also a micro rest. It's not long, but it's something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And those micro rests are valuable. You see the best riders in a breakaway. A lot of the time you'll see them and they'll be going through something and they'll coast into that turn or something like that. And you'd think that you're the solo breakaway rider. You can't ease off the gas ever, but they know what they're doing. Those micro rests help. So Dennis's question, Nate, when I read this question, I thought of you, and I'm glad we have you on here for this one. It says, I've been a podcast. It's a bit of a long question, but it's good. I've been a podcast fan since your TT challenge and have enjoyed years of entertainment for free. The least I could do is sign up for TrainerRoad, rate and share the podcast. That's what I've done. Thank you, TR gang. Dennis is exemplary. That's his whole question. I'm joking. That's not his whole question. But do what he's done. If you're listening on Spotify right now, rate us 5 stars. Please do that. If you're listening on whatever podcast app, that helps us get discovered by other cyclists. And then this podcast is free. We turn down sponsorship offers many, many times every single week. And we keep it this way because we want it to be here to help people get faster. So then you know that you can trust us. That way you'll sign up for TrainerRoad and use it. And we don't have investors. We're a bootstrapped company. So this is how we keep on going. So we really appreciate you listening and sharing with your friends. Okay. The question, What are the most and least worthwhile investments you've made into cycling? It wasn't many years ago that I was a poor college student dreaming of getting a carbon bike with Shimano 105. Maybe not now that it's like, maybe we're all dreaming of Tiagra after seeing how expensive 105 is when it was released yesterday. I don't know if you saw that, Nate, but it's wire, or it's Di2 now. 105 is Di2, which is cool.
Twice.
But I think it's, yeah, it's like double the cost or something like that. It's like over $2,100 for the whole group set. Wow. So yeah, crazy. It says, I'm now in a position in my life where I can comfortably afford what others may see as frivolous expenditures on this obsession/hobby. I recently built up a new Cervelo P5X. So that's the triathlon Cervelo P5. It looks crazy. It doesn't look like a normal bike, for those that are wondering. So I recently built up a new Cervelo P5X with everything you could possibly do to make it more aero and efficient. Ceramic bearings and oversized pulleys, custom molded extensions. That's pretty cool. I wonder if they did the 3D molded or 3D printed ones, or those are cool. Like, you see that in the Tour de France, like the best
Aero Lab and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the one, you can tell which riders matter most on the teams because they have like their own custom molded trays, right? Everybody else just has extensions. Also mentions tri-spoke and a disc wheel, paying mechanics to go over every detail to make sure the bike is absolutely perfect, etc. I was excited to see if, I was excited to see if I could get my CDA down from the previous low of 0.21. That's still, that's not bad, right? 0.21. Yep. That's pretty low.
That's not, I think it's excellent.
I think that you were 0.24.
We were 0.24.
Yeah. And you were like 0.2, John, but then that was a little bit too aggressive for you to hold power, correct. I think. Yeah.
Yes.
But 0.21 is amazing, especially for a triathlete, I'm guessing, since Cervelo P5.
Yeah, geez, if you can hold that in a triathlon.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that'd be sweet, right? So I was excited to see if I could get my CDA down from the previous low of 0.21. And CDA, for those that don't understand, is coefficient of drag area. So that's how they measure the drag that you are creating as a cyclist. So after benchmarking my previous speed concept with normal aero bars, Di2 and Zip 808 wheels, it barely had any effect on my CDA. So this new bike barely had any effect. It barely dropped it, reducing it down to 0.208. Considering how much money I put into that build, that was a massive disappointment. And he says, insert sad trombone. After testing the bikes, I tested the Giro.
I want to tell people that's like a 2-watt improvement. And that's probably a $12,000,
that's a lot of money.
Large expenditure.
Got to be somewhere
14,
around
like total. Maybe $15,000. Like stuff is
astronomical.
Yeah, cost per watt.
Sometimes you wish you just didn't know. Like if you didn't have access to measure your CDA, what if you didn't know and you thought you spent a bunch of money on something and you thought you were way faster,
right?
And you never found out. Yeah. Sorry.
Then no, it's like really good point, right, Ivy? Because now, like once you know it, you're just like upset, not I can feel it. Sometimes happiness watts are all you need, right? And blissfulness is happiness sometimes. But after testing the bikes, I tested the Giro Arrowhead, and that's a helmet, by the way, for everybody listening to this, which dropped my CDA to 0.198. I spent $300 on that helmet. So in comparison, the cost per watt here is not even remotely close, right? So this just shows. Okay. So then Dennis says, this had me looking at all the money I've spent on getting faster and looking at the returns in terms of 40 KTT performance. This will come off as a sponsored plug, but TR has had the most impact for me, and the least has to be ceramic bearings. So which this is what I would expect. We've done this. You can check out our Instagram. We've broken down like the cost of getting faster, and we've looked at the different upgrades you can do to get faster and what basically the ROI is, like how much money you spend for how much faster you get. And yeah, a quality structured training plan, especially one that adapts to you with adaptive training, is going to be a high ROI.
Or just train now.
Yeah, there we go. Train now is great too. So then the question, how about all of you? And I think they're asking for the best ROI for us and worst ROI. A training camp. I'm thinking of Chad's Italy experience. I know that wasn't really a training camp, more of an experience, but nutrition, a recovery protocol. Many thanks. Nate, can you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, I got a few things to say. Remember when Chad did his Italy camp? It was a Trek travel trip, and it was amazing, right, Chad? We went to the Dolomites.
Yeah, it's the 100th anniversary of the Giro.
So cool.
Yeah. On his TrainerRoad TSS chart, like we saw his It's almost, we need to like change the feature because he had so much like 200 to 300 TSS weeks. And there's one with like 1400 and it changed the scale. So that everything else looks so small.
It still stands out. I can look at like a 5-year view of it and it's still impossible to make any sense of it except for that single spike.
We need that little like thing where it, they do it in like economics and stuff where it says like, this is like way higher and it kind of breaks the graph in half.
Yeah.
That too, that kind of almost, that Chad, did that, I want to say break you, but it almost seems like that was your like, I am content with cycling. That was the pinnacle experience.
Yeah.
And
all my training was for that. That wasn't training. I wasn't going there to get fitter. I knew there might be some fun byproduct where I got back and rested for a couple of weeks and then reaped the benefit of it in terms of fitness. But when I got back, I was just eager to ride more. So I don't think I ever really got on top of the recovery. That's kind of beside the point though. I mean, I was there to just play. I wasn't there to do, we can't call it a training camp.
Yeah. So my best investment 12, 13 years ago, going to Chad Timmerman's CompuTrainer classes. Because without that, there would be no TrainerRoad. That's crazy, right? To think of that. I saw an email through the Reno Wheelman and like all of everybody's jobs and all that sort of stuff. Somebody decided to put that out.
That underscores the priority. That it's all training. It's training first. If the training's not there, anything you add to it isn't going to matter. I dare say even nutrition falls slightly below training, not far below it, but slightly below it. I mean, you have to, well, I mean, you got to fuel the training. So I guess maybe consider those two things equal, but it's all training. I mean, 98% of it is the training. Everything else, the strategy, the fancy parts, the recovery protocols, and all the fun things that you can do to enhance your recovery. None of those things make even kind of stack up to the quality of your training. And
I'm not done with my story, Chad. The other part that makes it available is that Chad Timmerman charged $20 a class. And if Chad was charging like $5 or $10 a class, there'd be no TrainerRoad. I mean, this is I guess this is an ad and take it for what it is, but I don't know anything in cycling that makes you faster for the amount of money. People on the forum are very, we go into details about, AFTP says my FTP is 234, but then I did a lactic special test and it was 233. Like, how am I supposed to train? But what you look at is the outcome. Like, if you are getting, if you pay $20 and you get, 10 watts faster in a month or even in 3 months. So that's what, $60 for that. There's nothing even close to that in all of cycling, which is amazing. You do have to put effort in, but I don't know, you can ask me to see if there's anything else you think is better. And we have the data too, to prove people get faster using TrainerRoad. And I think there's Successful Athletes podcast. If you don't think it's possible, we have how many of those? 40, 70?
There's 70 of them. Yep.
70 of them. Okay. So watch all 70 in a row.
Yeah, there you go. We also just had the top experience share by an athlete that told us how it helped them get ready for an ultra endurance event too, right? Like, it's across the board. Can we talk about worst ROI? Ivy, have you had something we're looking? Oh, sorry, Nate.
No, go ahead. I'll talk more later.
Yeah. Because Ivy, you've been through pro teams. You've done like a lot of different stuff where maybe you didn't spend the money directly. So I'm giving you license to just share like what things, maybe you didn't necessarily have to buy it, but what things just did not have as much of an impact as you think they would.
Beet juice. Before I totally thought it was gonna be the thing for me to take me to the next level. No, it did not. But before being a professional, I thought about this a lot. It took me a long time to decide what I wanted to say about this because it's just hard to know. I think it was tubular wheel sets when I was an amateur, like and racing road. I think for something like track, it's probably more necessary, but on the road as an amateur, I had no business spending a bunch of money when I was like working in restaurants, thinking that tubular wheels were that much more important for me, especially when they make great carbon clinchers that are totally affordable. I had no business doing that and would have been just fine without them. Like I won Land Park a few months ago on aluminum training clinchers set up tubeless. Like, I didn't like, you don't need multi-$1,000 wheel sets to do well. So yeah, that was my worst investment in cycling, I think.
John, you probably know what I'm going to say, but remember when I bought that red S-Works Tarmac Ronald McDonald's bike? I had just lost I had lost it was a Cat 3 race. And if I would have I would have upgraded if I would have got this. And I lost by a quarter of a wheel. There's a video of it on the uphill. And I did bad strategy stuff. And I'm like, man, tarmac, that's going to lower me. I would have won that race. So I need a climbing bike. I'm an air quotes professional. I got videos on me on the internet. This is my job. I get them at like a discount. Why would I not do this? Spend a whole bunch of money, build up the bike, put it on. John's with me. We're weighing the both. Same exact weight as my bench. And
I thought the scale was broken. It was like, there was so much excitement to see how light this bike could be for Nate. And I can't tell you, like, there was
17.8 pounds or something.
There was an absolute, like, tangible awkwardness in the air when I put it on the scale. It's the exact same.
There was swearing.
Zero change.
So the frame was lighter. The difference I had like even the same wheel set, but I had different tires. I had the GP. What are the new GPs? What are they called?
GP 5000s.
5000s. Yeah, and those are a little bit heavier, the tubeless. And the other ones, I had the extremely light Corsa Speed, the Corsa whatever, the really really fast ones that are paper thin. That was the difference, and that was enough to even out the weight of the entire bike. Was just that. So they don't
just tires.
This is probably why they don't put the weight of those extra large frames. And I think the extra large frames too need extra, extra carbon, because it's just longer to make it not flex and to make it ride well. And it makes sense to do that. But this was the old tarmac too. So I don't know if the new tarmac the SL7 has a difference in it. But I feel your pain, Dennis, like to spend all that money and then to be like, are you serious? And the 0.08 of the wind tunnel, the point, the 2 watts is within the measurable, like, probably the difference.
It's a margin of error.
Yeah, margin of error, right? In the wind tunnel. So basically nothing and all of that stuff. I hope you sold your bike and just went to the old one because you could get some of that money back. Yeah. And so course training, and there's other stuff with aero we've talked about, aero helmet, and then a really good piece of kit. Piece of kit makes you feel good, tight, the amount of speed that you get everywhere, and then evaporative cooling, get light clothing, that cold black stuff. It does make black more tolerable, but white is better. Like if you're in a hot race, get a white kit. That will save you so much performance in a race. It gets dirty. It might, especially if you're a mountain biker, the TrainerRoad kits, they get dirt on it. If you're vain, you ask for new kits all the time from your boss. But if you're not, you can just wear a kit that like no one else will see that it's that. Another great, really inexpensive way for extreme race day performance, and even in races, caffeine pills. Like they are dirt cheap. So much science, right, Chad? Chad's drinking a cup of coffee. So much science that it improves performance. What you don't want to do though is never ever buy the powder. People have died on the powder because it's like, it's so easy. Instead of taking 200 milligrams, they take 2 grams, and too much caffeine can kill you. But
run
pills,
gum, that's run gum is so easy.
That gum stuff is awesome. I've done that on the bike. You take it or right before a race.
Super quick.
Yep. And so tell me more about that, John.
Yeah, it doesn't if people listen to this and they just never have a problem with caffeine, this may be less relevant to you. But for me, I don't take in caffeine hardly ever. So when I do, if I take it in through like a caffeine gel that has 100 milligrams, my stomach is exploded. So like I have to like save that for the end of the race and just know, okay, so after this race, I'm going to feel terrible for like 6 hours. We did that during Valley of the Sun during that road race, and my stomach was destroyed after the TT on the first day. And I think it kind of hurt things later on. So run gum, it seems to not mess up your stomach because it's absorbed differently. It's not absorbed through your gut. Don't swallow the gum. Just, you chew it and then it's absorbed that way into your bloodstream really quickly. It hits really quickly, doesn't hit as hard. At least these are perceptions. This is not me relaying scientific research or anything else.
Well, it's only 100 milligrams instead of 2. No-dose is like usually 2. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So smaller. And then in addition to that, when you chew that and then you go through the whole thing of having it, it doesn't seem to drop you off as hard. And I don't know, this is backed up by everybody I know. It just anecdotally, everybody I know says that's one of the main reasons that they use it, because they feel like it's not as big of a spike and a drop. It's more of like a steady lift. So I really do like it. I find it really helpful for racing. I'm not, and this isn't sponsored, and there's a lot of other brands other than Run Gum. They've just kind of Kleenex the thing, you know, but
caffeine in general. I've told my ADHD story and like my understanding of myself and my self-medication through the years. And if you haven't heard it, basically people with ADHD is what I've been told. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. Your dopamine response, like your reward center, isn't the same as normal people. And you really, unless you're highly interested in something, if you need a stimulant, and caffeine is a stimulant, in order to get that same response. So what I've also found is actually motivation to train is I would always have a cup of coffee. And I felt like I thought I was tired, and sometimes I was tired, but a lot of times I would just sit there with my phone. I just didn't have the task switching ability or the task start. And then once I went, it was fine. So having caffeine, you want to do it earlier in the day though, because it can impact your sleep. Like I think a good rule of thumb, Chad has talked about before noon. Y'all smiling. What jokes are you saying? All three of you are smiling at once.
It's the next question. It's not about this.
Sorry.
Okay. So that can help too. I used to do 7 cups of coffee a day, and it was extremely, it really helped.
Awesome.
But yeah, it was awesome. John, I don't know if you remember, like we'd go out to lunch and I'd always be like, let's get coffee afterwards. Right.
Yes,
like
totally
all the time I needed coffee, and I didn't even have the connection. And I worked TrainerRoad all that time and was successful with that. But caffeine, if you have ADHD, can help motivate to get on the bike. If you have that problems, have you ever sat there in your kit on your phone, 45 minutes go by and you're like, oh my gosh, I would be almost done with my workout if I just would get on the bike. There's things before I took Adderall, literally something would sit here for 5 months and I just see it every single day and not do it. I took Adderall and I did it in like 20 minutes. I was just like, oh, I'll just finish this right now. No big deal. Crazy.
And not flippantly, but through like working with a professional and everything else.
I have a therapist on the street. I have a therapist doctor who I talked to a lot, and then she diagnosed me, and then we tried medications and like did things in. And this is a many month thing that found out what worked for me. And it's from everyone else I've heard has ADHD. It takes a while. Same with antidepressants. It takes a while to get you dialed into the right way, and you have to have a lot of you might get discouraged and stuff like that. And it takes a while. So work with a doctor. Don't do it flippantly. But if you do you experience this caffeine thing, I would talk to a doctor about it and see what they say.
Can I share the worst ROI thing for me?
For you? Yeah, I got way more stuff too to spend money on. But yeah, go ahead.
So one of them, like number one, it has to be in my specific example. Like right now, like I have an S-Works Epic. If I bought a normal one, that would save me so much money. And I guarantee you it's not even measurable, the difference I get between like the fanciest one that I have and then getting the pro level one just below
Mr. Half Bottle.
Yeah, good point. Good point. But that has to be like example number one of loss there. The other thing, I don't think my recovery boots make me any faster, and they're really expensive. They're like squeezy boots. I don't think they make me any faster on the bike. They do feel good, and there's value in that. And there's a lot of things that we spend money on as cyclists or endurance athletes that do make us feel good. And those are important. Not everything has to dial back into performance. So that does bear mentioning. In some cases, like it's just nice to be able to, I can't afford, and even the logistics of getting a massage every day, like the cost and inconvenience of that would be impossible. Like I couldn't do that. So this is like a next best thing, and it feels nice, but I don't think it actually makes me faster on the bike. It just makes me feel good. And those are really expensive. Massage guns too. I think that they feel good. I'm not sure they make me faster, and boy, they can get really expensive. Like most of the recovery modalities, if I would just eat really good food, that's like one of the highest ROIs for me. And when I'm talking about so Ivy mentioned this year, she's had a significant increase coming from her detrained state to her trained state. But over the year, I bet if you compare your highs, Ivy fights for a handful of watts of improvement, 1 year to the next. And when you're in that position, you start to notice the difference that small things make. And just nourishing myself with good food and eating enough is one of the greatest things that I've seen for my performance. It allows me to train more. It allows me to train and then carry on the rest of my life instead of just putting everything on hold because I'm training a lot. So that's, I would say nutrition is one of the greatest things. Training is absolutely number one, like we've said, but good nutrition's a helpful one, but it doesn't have to be crazy expensive. Don't buy like race specific nutrition all the time. It's just, vegetables, it's whole grains. It's like the basic stuff of the food pyramid.
It's they're the same. It's very expensive not to eat healthy because you pay that money long term. It's like, where do you want to spend the money? There's also something called the ADHD tax. And I heard about this and I'm like, this resonates with me a lot. You ever buy vegetables and you're like, oh, there's cut up pre-made ones, or there's the ones that are not, and I'll save money for the ones that are not. And they sit in your fridge and they go bad because you don't want to like prep them. And they call that like the ADHD tax, where if you just would have spent a little extra money on the prepped food, you'd look at it and open it, right? And you got to keep it in sight and stuff like that. So if you want to spend, $15,000 on a bike, imagine, man, you almost get like the meal prep and all that sort of stuff that you could outsource to someone else to have healthy food. I think we're going to talk about it next. High carb diet, amazing. High carb diet with like fibrous foods with like micronutrients, you feel so much better. And then your long-term health outcome is better. And your body composition, you will feel more full. You won't be as hungry. Your skin will be better. Like your recovery will be better. A lot of things, you'll be anti-inflammatory stuff, right? Long-term disease gets reduced. That's an amazing way to spend money. Is you can say, I'm not going to buy this S-Works. Okay, I love you, Specialized, but let's all say S-Works, a little bit of a flex of brand, right? Like totally shows everyone. Yeah. And then if you are a top pro, that's one thing. With us, we actually said, remember, and this is probably not a good way to think about it, but we're almost like real estate agents. We're like, we don't look successful unless we buy an S-Works or something like that. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But the reason
that I get mine is because I keep my bikes fresh every year. So I resell it. So then I lose minimal value on my bikes every year. Right. So, because if I buy a lower end bike, it typically doesn't sell as high. So it's the thing is that's like a totally different ball game that I'm dealing with there. Right. It's like not a performance aspect.
And you also get discounts, which is
correct.
Amazing. So John can actually be even on this. And that's the thing that a lot of pros do, right? Ivy, is you get some bike for some cost, either reduced or free, you can make money. And that's one thing. I think it would have been probably would have set a way better example in cycling if we just would have rode like 105, like rival, stuff this whole time. And then just done just as well. Like, I don't think anything would have changed in our outcomes.
Well, if you have to have all the fancy gear and you want a high ROI, or at least a higher ROI than buying a brand new Cervelo P5X, and custom extensions doesn't quite apply, but buy a used bike. I mean, wait a year, buy Jonathan's bike, because the bike that he paid, or that is worth 12 grand. I don't know if you can get half that. I mean, used bikes just don't hold value at all. No, it's depressing. That's why I keep all my bikes too, because I'm not going to get anything back for them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go through the things and that I would pay money for equipment that's not Aero, because Aero we've talked about so much. What would be ad hoc? What's the way you
ad
say?
Nauseum. Ad nauseum.
Ad nauseum. That's the one.
Hey,
a lot of Latin going on here.
We do a lot of ad nauseum. So, and some of these things too they improve, like they get me excited, and being excited to ride your bike is a performance benefit. You're more motivated, and just the amount of grit you have to do is less. And then, first I want to say this too. Coaching, in-person skills, in-person coaching. That is worth so much money. If you're in America, Lee McCormick for mountain biking is fantastic. He will do private lessons. If you get a group of people together, the local, like, he'll bring coaches out and stuff. You talk to him. It is surprisingly affordable. And for the amount of money, for speed you will get back, but also enjoyment and safety is incredible. Huge. And Lee's one of those people too. Lee's like one of the most authentic humans that I know, right? And you'll get a connection with him, and he's there forever, right? He's one of those people that you make a connection, and he'll coach you forever, and you'll want to do more and more classes with him. So that sort of thing. And if others too, even road skills, bike clinics where they're teaching you how to corner and you have someone else with a good eye looking at you, even if you've done it for many, many years, there are small tweaks. Have you guys ever had that where someone goes very small tweak, you've been running forever and it changed? Lee did it to you, John, right? Like
totally.
You were a very, very fast racer. He changed a few things and you got even faster. So I just want to say that just because you are a Cat 1 cyclist, you're amazing does not mean that you can't get any better.
And it doesn't just make you faster. Right. I mean, that elevates your level of enjoyment. Just being able to do that one thing slightly better makes it so much more fun.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the first one's all mental, just like nice sunglasses sunglasses can be pretty expensive, but I like just having a really nice pair of sunglasses that don't get sweat on you. It could be any brand you want, but just splurge for those and they can last a really, really, really long time through many bikes. I enjoy that. And the looking too, the vision, those like the Oakley Road vision thingy.
The prisms.
I like it. Yeah, I like that a lot. Do you guys like it?
Those are amazing.
Yeah, and like lots of brands. I think is it POC or Smith? I know they both have something similar. Yeah, and they have like that Chroma Pop, I think is what Smith has. There's lots of brands that have like specific filtering designed for different contexts, and I do find it helpful. Totally.
The trail ones too, where like, because when you mountain biking, it goes from very bright to very dark quickly, and having glasses that can handle that, way more enjoyable, actually more speed too, right? Because you don't have to, your brain CPU doesn't slow down like John's. It could be so scary when you're single core.
AMD Athlon. Sorry.
I've had that before too with just regular sunglasses where it's very bright and then you go into a dark section, especially like in Canada, and you're darn near blind for like 10 seconds. It is crazy. Nice tires. Man, pay more for those nice tires. They are, that can have a huge impact on your ride quality. And even, man, I like a little bit of faster tire too. I like the Corsa speeds for racing. I know you might get cuts, but if you're in a crit and you do have some kind of pit wheel or like an old wheel, do the Corsas, they handle well, they can slice open, but as long as you can get it to a pit stop, it's awesome. And they roll really fast. And
sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
And then wax chain, if it's done, I just like to, I tried doing it forever, just buy it from Ice Friction and you can actually send it in and get a new one. But a properly waxed chain, and I've improperly done a lot, is so quiet, the efficiency, like it is so nice to have that. And it is a big watt increase, especially if you don't take care of your chain.
That's a tough one. Relatively inexpensive, if we're talking about, it's still like, it's not cheap.
Yeah. But you got to buy a chain anyways.
Well, not all the time. Right. And if you buy a preconditioned wax chain, then it wears out over time, the value of the wax. Right. So
true. So you can re-wax it too, as like a training chain.
It's a lot of hassle. That's like,
I was just giggling, thinking of the paraffin waxing you have to have in your house. And I was like, oh, I should get one. And then I dip my hands in it when I do manicures at home.
It's like for me, and this is good because this shows the different perspectives on it. Wax chain is one of the worst ROI things for me. I can't stand it. Like they don't last well in adverse conditions. I've just spent a ton of money on the thing. I had to put a new chain on, and that's a pain. Or I had to go through and get quick links, which these days getting quick links, they're rare as hen's teeth with like all the problems that we have with supply chain issues. For some reason, you can't get them. So like, it's one of the worst things for me. Now for Nate, I've visibly seen this when Nate has a wax chain. Nate's like Maverick from Top Gun. He's like on top of the world. He's like, nothing can stop him. It's the sort of thing that helps his confidence and gets him where he needs to be.
I only do wax chains. And I mean, you could get a 10-watt increase for like a $80 investment. It's insane. You can save it for a race day. And if you're going through river crossings and don't do that. But if you're in a crit and you normally have a gross chain, you can put a wax chain on in, I don't know, 30 seconds.
Here's another thing.
You got to cut the length though.
We're going deeper than we should into this, but if you have a wax chain on a really true. Yeah, there we go. If you have a wax chain on top of a worn out drivetrain, like, I don't know. There's no studies that have been done on like a worn out drivetrain and then putting a wax chain on. And I don't know if the savings is the same. And that's like the majority of folks that I'm thinking of that might be in a situation where they have a blown out chain. It's like nasty, dirty, probably stretched and worn out. Their gears are going to match that. And then as a result, I don't know if you actually get as many savings with it. It's just like, if you keep them fresh all the time, yeah, you'll be on top of it. But then that's a lot of hassle and a lot of expense.
This is one of those things that in like 2 years, you guys can cut this clip out, that like of other things that I'm right about. When the whole pro peloton's doing wax chains every single, like every stage, because they've come to the fact that they know that it's
I bet
faster.
they are. I wouldn't be surprised if they are.
I see them lube stuff, and never
That's
lube a
crazy.
wax chain because it gets so dirty and grimy. It is crazy. But
Yeah.
John, that thing about the drivetrain being worn, I don't think I've worn an actual drivetrain down before I get like a new bike. But I do is the chain stretch, and having there's a tool that is like pretty expensive, like $20 or something, and you put it in between the chains, and depending on the speeds, you have like different sides. It's the Park Tools chain one, and if it passes through, your chain is worn. And having a nice shifting drivetrain, I mean, that I swear that gives you watts. It doesn't give you watts, but I mean, actually it might with the with friction, like if something's rubbing, but the mental clarity, the cognitive load of just having something that goes dunk, dunk, dunk. And that's why we like electronic shifting from SRAM or Shimano. I've never tried campy stuff, but
the mechanical stuff shifts just as fine these days. You know what I mean? It's all.
Yeah, but electronic is so good.
I know it is.
It's so
easy
easy
if we're talking
to
about
trim while you're
ROI.
riding. Go.
If we're talking about ROI, it's pretty darn low. You know what I mean? Mechanical shifts just fine. So when you're talking about Ultegra, shifts perfectly. It's amazing. And I bet the new 105 shifts just as fine as like an example. So there's stuff that gives you enjoyment, but then there's stuff that gives you like an actual ROI. And the enjoyment stuff, there's tons of things, but the actual ROI part's tough. So yeah.
Oh, I have one more tip. Another one on food. I think what I've done is I hit the carb side right, but I did not hit my protein intake high enough. I think we've talked about it. Chad, is it 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight to aim for per day when cycling?
I think that's for endurance athletes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I've just done the Fairlife protein shakes. Have you seen those? They have two different versions of them. They are lactose free. They say lactose free, but I think they just put lactase in them. I am incredibly lactose intolerant. I can drink these things. They have 26 grams per bottle, and they have two versions. One is a sugar-free version, but one has 26 grams of carbs in it too, and sugar. So as a post-workout, easy to buy, easy to make, low, because you can make your own recovery shakes, but sometimes I skip those because it's a hassle. It doesn't have to be refrigerated. They are more expensive than doing whey protein just directly, but as a convenience thing, it is nice. And having enough protein will make you recover better, along with the carb intake. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chad. If you don't eat protein, it's gonna be hard to be a fast cyclist.
It's all for naught.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no doubt. We're going to end this question off with Chris from the live chat said a proper bike fit might be the highest ROI. That's a great point. But the thing is, the cost on those, if you're doing like one of the really expensive fits, I don't know. Sorry, bike fitters. I've found like a fantastic ROI from Competitive Cyclist bike fit tool online. It's like a really basic thing where you enter in your measurements and it gets you in the ballpark. And I've had fits where I've been like validated with machinery and like infrared stuff and everything else. And it's the same fit that what I get with that free bike fit calculator. Now I'm also like a very much a center bell curve person. So it might be different if you fall outside of that. If you have really long legs or something like that, it might be different. But
hey, I've spent, I think, $3,000 total on bike fits. And I had one amazing one in South Africa at the Specialized headquarters there. Willem, I think his name's Willem. It was he adjusted my mountain bike. It was so much better after he did it. Other ones I'm going to have a point here. TT one, $700. You buy all these new equipment, buy this new cockpit. I could not hold the position for more than like 60 seconds and you'll get used to it, kind of thing. How many times do us triathletes or 40K TTers put into a position and then you immediately tweak it, right? Like 1 week later, you tweak it and you keep tweaking it and tweaking it. And
you spent thousands on it, or you just spent like a $700, but let me just tweak it,
Yeah. And I just want to say, like, I would get other cyclists' opinion directly and say, hey, what was your experience in this? So if it's a triathlon or TT, ask other people that are doing the same thing, because it's a feedback. It goes back and forth. If any fitter goes, this is the way it should be, without hearing your experience and how it feels, I would not like go with that fitter, because move on. Right. It's a combo. It's subjective too. It's not just, these are the exact measurements, so do it, because everyone's body is different. You got to feel it.
Yeah, and who you are as a rider and the level of experience you bring to the table is a huge factor, because I built 2 bikes recently and I've eyeballed them completely. I haven't taken a single measurement from a previous bike. I just look at it like, that looks pretty good. And I'll ride it around the driveway, tweak something down a little bit, and then go do a 4-hour ride and all's well. So, but again, I've been riding bikes 30 plus years. So I do have that to build on. Someone who is newer to the game, a bike fit's probably going to make a heck of a lot more sense.
I see Chad just like eyeballing saddle height. It's like,
I do.
I got it within a millimeter. It's pretty good.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah. You can compare across bikes, and I do get pretty close. But again, that's from looking at my bikes, riding my bikes, knowing a lot about me as a rider.
Not a bike. Oh, another one. This is a cool tip. This is expensive, but I've used it so much, is that Bike Abby saddle
bike
level.
tools?
Abby bike tools. Yeah, it's like how much is it? Like $200 or something? It's a piece of
way
metal
overpriced.
with like, it's a piece of metal with little things on it. But what it does is you put it on your saddle and you can dial in your saddle height. So if you're one of those picky people and you travel or you go through bikes, there's another thing where you put it in the bottom bracket. So your tape measure is always in the exact same spot. What it does is make it so you can measure into the exact same spot every time on your saddle, and you can put your phone on it for the degrees, and you can make sure that's exactly the same. So you can be consistent between all of that stuff, and it's easier to measure from tip of your saddle to your handlebars and stuff like that with this tool. And I was so on the fence of buying it, but I've used it so many times.
I use Sharpie on my seat post. It's amazing.
I was just thinking that. And with the saddle angle too, I would draw a line from the rail to the attachment point below that pivots on the seat post, so that you line them up, and then you know that your angle's right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you guys are just smarter than me.
Let's move into the next question. This one's fantastic. It's from Coach C, but I've actually I've made a change here. And I'm really excited to hear that Coach C has submitted a question to the podcast. It's been a long time coming. It's not Coach C though, it's Coach Chaz. So Coach Chaz says, longtime host, first time caller. On a recent ride, I managed to outpace what I thought was a tolerable level of carbohydrate intake and ended up running out of gas, even in the face of a belly full of carbo gels. So how is this possible? Some details. A ride planned for 3 hours in about 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit conditions, or 27 to 29 degrees Celsius. Look, Coach Chaz even converts the units when he submits a question. This is fantastic. I like this. Fueled by 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour via one 80-gram drink mix during hour 1, and via multiple 20 to 40 gram gels during hours 2 and 3. But it turned into a 4-hour ride due to one crucial missed turn. Though I have plenty of backup nutrition, and Chad, you of course only be guessing at this athlete's experience. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But says, though I had plenty of backup nutrition, I was simply unable to bring myself to down another gel or anything sweet for that matter, and later learned that it wouldn't have mattered anyway. Evidence of this came as I later vomited up what tasted like wholly undigested salted watermelon isotonic gel, bearing a striking resemblance to what the gel looked like straight out of the package.
Poor Chaz.
Sachet. Yeah. I like how Chaz uses the word sachet as well. Fantastic. Well done, Chaz. Simply, it hadn't digested even a little. So where did I go wrong? And P.S., if you know anyone that wants to buy a few cases of salted watermelon isotonic gels real cheap, I can be reached at. We won't give away Chaz's
Chad at TrainerRoad.com.
You mean Chaz?
Chaz. It's Chaz. Chaz.
We should create a Chaz at TrainerRoad.com email where we collect like sarcastic things. That would be fantastic.
Dead letter office. Yeah, it's not okay.
Yeah. All right. So Chad, if you had to guess at Chaz's experience here, what sort of things could you What sort of things could you offer him?
Well, first off, I'd like to commend Chaz on an excellent question. It's very, very thoroughly described, well developed, and I've had the same questions myself. So
strange.
This is obviously me, and I can distill this down to. I've given this a lot of thought. It was just Saturday or Sunday, so it was only so long ago. But I see it as 4 potential and probably compounding mistakes. I'm only really going to get into 2 of them, but I do want to discuss the other 2 briefly. First off, dehydration, whether I recognize it or not, never helps matters. A study from as far back as 1989 talked about how hypohydration or dehydration significantly reduces gastric emptying, just how quickly your stomach empties. Not to mention hydration's impact on cooling, how that relates to water in the gut for digestion, et cetera. Water's pretty important. So simple point here is that I was doomed the minute I missed that turn. And
Chad, before you go any further,
okay.
I feel like this is an important point, and we're kind of glossing over it. Isotonic gels. I see a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't need to drink because I'm taking isotonic gels, so my gut can take
wrong
it."
With that.
And we should all it doesn't hurt to take in more water. It's not going to make it so that you don't process the gel as well. It's going to only help you
to an extent.
Yeah, to an extent. Yeah. If you're doing
someone is going to message in, you can kill yourself if you drink too much water without any sodium.
Good point.
Yeah. No, you still need hydration. The isotonic gels simply won't disrupt the osmolality in the gut. So they're not about hydrating exactly. They're about interfering with hydration. So, and even then, isotonic gels are problematic because if everything else you're taking in isn't isotonic, then you're messing with that tonicity in your gut anyway. I mean, even water can upset the balance. It's a topic for probably another time.
But that's what I've always thought. Like, so you have the gel and then you take a drink. And then it's mixed together, like you put it in a bowl before and drink it. It's not the same.
What about anything that's already in your gut? What about other things you put in your gut? I mean, it's more complex than it may at first seem. So we could talk about that at another time. In fact, I wanted to talk about that, but this got a little elaborate as it was, and I had to trim it way back. But there's some information locked and loaded that I would like to cover at some point in the near future. Okay, so that's the first possible mistake. Second, I didn't give the heat fair consideration, which is why I added the heat to the description. Again, this Newfer study, they talked about as core temperature increases, gastric emptying decreases, right? These 2 things are negatively correlated. And then Owen and colleagues in 1986, so again, we've known this stuff for a long time, noted that even water clears the stomach more slowly in the heat. So these heat stress effects also carry to intestinal motility. So, the movement of stuff in your intestines is also affected. On top of that, gut function degrades over time, and heat doesn't help this. So a very recent, I don't know if it's a new research or review, but King, Rollo, and Baker, just 2021, remind us that exertional heat stress, what we're talking about when we're exercising, can compromise the integrity of our intestinal barrier. And they did this in a paper discussing nutritional interventions aimed at reducing these negative effects of this exertional heat stress on our guts. And it's a paper worth reading. And again, there's more details than we probably needed for this dive. But my point is that an eating strategy that works early in long event, for example, 80 grams per hour during hours 1 through 3 may be tolerable. Less so during hours 4, 5, 6, if you happen to find yourself out there for longer. So my simple advice so far is to exploit your gut's freshest capabilities and if you've ascended to the high ranks or even paid attention to the high ranks, you'll hear this term a lot: eat early, eat often. And that's probably one of the motivations behind it. Obviously, you want to get a jump on top of your carbohydrate intake, but there are other benefits to eating early, eating often. Okay, third possibility, and this is probably the most likely, or at least coupled with the other most likely, is that my carbohydrate intake jumped a little too dramatically. And this has really to do with the rate of gut adaptation. We talk about we can train our guts. So the question really at this point is, at what rate and what frequency should we increase our daily carbohydrate intake in order to train our guts? And of course, do so while avoiding GI distress. Sadly, this isn't a known thing yet. And I'm talking, I listened to a presentation by Oscar Ukendrup from just a couple weeks ago, I think maybe a month ago. And it's just not present in the scientific literature yet, not with humans. With animal studies, they've seen changes as quickly as 3 days. And that doesn't mean you're done and dusted at 3 days. It just means, things are starting to happen at about 3 days in. And then when it comes to humans, I mean, you can kind of look back a paper from 2010 by Cox and Louise Burke and other researchers, which is probably the first study to demonstrate the whole idea of gut, or evidence of gut trainability. And they provided, or they withheld carbohydrate during 28 days of training. So basically a month of training. During the training, the athletes either got water or they got a 10% glucose solution. And this is actually an important side note, is that both groups received 5 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per day. So they were not on low carbohydrate diets. They were eating just the same until they were on the bike, at which time they had isocaloric training. They had the same number of calories. It was just in different macronutrient distributions. So the people who got carbohydrate got 1.5 kilograms, grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight versus 0.1 on the no carb side. Cool. So for a 70 kilogram athlete, someone who weighs 154 pounds, so basically what Jonathan is at right now, that's 105 grams of carbohydrate per hour. That's a lot versus 7 grams on the other side of thing, which is virtually nothing. And then they assess the changes, the gut changes, via a 100-minute steady state effort followed by a short kilogram-based time trial or kilojoule-based time trial. And it's also important to again restate that they were evenly carbohydrate fed for these trials. So they got the same amount of carbohydrates during the trials themselves. And what they noted was that the carbohydrate athletes increased their exogenous carbohydrate oxidation rates. So they could burn more carbohydrate, more incoming carbohydrate, stuff they ate during training. They started at 55 grams per hour and elevated that to 64 grams per hour over this 28-day stretch. That's a change of 16% over just under a month, or really 4 weeks of training with high carbohydrate intake on the bike. Both groups improved performance to a similar level, 6%. So there was no difference in performance, but there was a significant difference in their ability to use carbohydrate. Unfortunately, a couple sad notes with this study, just from my perspective, is that there was no mention of the incoming carbohydrate tolerance. So I don't know where these athletes were coming from. They could have been starting at 60 grams and somehow tolerating 105, which would be super interesting. Maybe they were as high as 90. Maybe they were already at 105. So can't really infer anything from that. And then the other sad note is that there was no mention of GI issues, GI distress. But I think it's safe to assume that if they did experience gastrointestinal issues, it doesn't appear to have affected performance. So the takeaway remains is that a high carbohydrate intake on the bike led to higher carbohydrate oxidation rates on the bike.
Not surprising.
Over time, it increased it. Yeah, I mean, their gut's trained. So this demonstrates the gut is in fact trainable. And in this case, over an evidently short time frame, happened reasonably quickly. So based on what is known so far, one recommendation is, and these are recommendations largely by Oscar Ukendrup, but also colleagues of his. I listened to and read a few other researchers, but he's kind of the man in the realm these days. He's at the coalface. His recommendation: daily increases in carbohydrate intake, and preferably this happens during workouts, and preferably during workouts that are most similar to your event. And these should start 5 to 10 weeks out from your event. Feel free to start sooner if the training merits it. And I mentioned that because 3 hours at 60% of, say, a 250 watt threshold, which by the way is going to be 150 watts, probably doesn't require 90 grams per hour. So be sensible with when you introduce this uptick. Increase the carbohydrate.
One vote for this though, Chad.
Sure.
There's something, personally speaking, this is an anecdote. This is not research. I can view those rides as a time to restrict, or I can view those rides as a time to be able to fuel myself, to get my body used to taking in and processing more. Just handling more. And depending on where I'm at in my training field, like right now, for example, I am fueling those lower endurance workouts just as if I was fueling on race day, because I want my gut to get to the point where it can handle that stuff. And it's dosing it like that does help.
Sure, there's nothing wrong with that. I just don't want to steer anyone into thinking that they have to start this as soon as possible, start just dousing their system in carbohydrate. Then they unfavorably affect their body composition. And now they're questioning this whole line of logic.
It's pretty tough to do that though. Like unfavorably affect your body composition with what you're drinking on the bike. I feel like that's tough. It's really the stuff that you're going to be doing off the bike.
It might be. That. No, that's a valid point. Yeah.
And to it, I'm a huge proponent of carbs, but I do agree with Chad, especially if you're doing shorter workouts and you have a lot of time in between workouts. If you're going 5-6 days per week, like what John just said, heck yeah. Like, cause then it's good backed up. But if you're doing 2 or 3 days per week and you're doing hour workouts, and you have time between, maybe, you do 60 or 40 grams for that hour and do it after if the thought of doing 90 is horrible. But to what Chad's point is, though, you're going to get performance improvements on race day on those longer things if you then up it up. You train it. So that could be, you don't have to do it the whole time if you really hate eating, because some people just hate it, right?
Well, I think with Oscar's or Jukendrup's new, he's got a training app which sounds really interesting, and I know Jumbo Visma is using it, and the development of it was driven. What's that?
I said, excuse me, Chad.
But the development of it, I think, was motivated by less a concern for, it's not a cash grab. I do feel that his motivations behind this are helping athletes suss out how I mean, all recognizing how subjective nutrition is, and to actually get that nutrition right based on events, based on workouts, based on how your weekly training regimen ebbs and flows. It's actually quite interesting. So I do lend more credence than I might to other researchers to him in particular. He's been doing this for quite a long time, 20 plus years. And these are his recommendations. So, I mean, you're not going to have to look too far and wide to recognize that most of what I'm telling you right now is pulled from his research and his learnings. And one of them are, he mentions to increase your carbohydrate intake at a conservative rate. And this is super subjective, right? I mean, I jumped up, I think 10 grams per hour. I probably maybe should have tried more like 5, or I probably should have just tried hydrating better. I think someone like Nate could probably do a 20 gram per hour jump and sustain it without any real issue. Probably just go faster, go longer.
I went from like, I think I doubled my carb intake. I went from like 90 to 180 or 160. And I did find a limit there that I backed up off. And I think like 150 was okay for me. But I'm also
a huge margin.
I know. And
you can tolerate it. You don't have GI distress. You can just put those carbs to use, or at that point,
I did go too high.
We're talking extremes though. I mean, 150, 180. Ooh.
But still, I'm 5'18". I had a high FTP at the time, and I was doing a lot of workout, and I had done 90 to 100 like all the time for maybe 2 years, right? Like I had done a lot for a long time.
Yeah, honestly, I wonder if there's
just like, jump to it.
There might be a tipping point. I mean, where if you can accommodate 100 per hour, then there's really no limit to what you can tolerate. Certainly not utilize, but tolerate.
There is some.
Sure.
A million grams an hour.
150, 180. That's so high. Okay.
It is.
So another recommendation is to consider the means of delivery, because one study I came across noted that there was a significant difference in gastric distress when they used 6% versus 8% carbohydrate beverage. So if you think about just a 500 milliliter bottle, typical size bottle, that's the difference between 30 grams carbohydrate and 40 grams of carbohydrate. So that little 10 gram bump actually led to more GI issues. And then the final bit of key advice, and this goes back to me wondering, my final potential issue was whether increasing carbohydrate will support longer ride durations at the same high intensity. So for example, if 2 hours at this many watts using 80 grams of carbohydrate is doable, is 3 hours, 4 hours, as long as I continue that 80 gram income. Bringing us to the first part of a two-part related recommendation. One is that gut training has to include your intended intensity. And this is an oversight that I've made a lot of times, and I don't know that we've ever really discussed, because what your gut can tolerate at marginally lower watts may not actually carry to slightly and especially higher power outputs. And the advice is 1 time a week exposure to your fueling plan coupled with race pace effort. So for example, if your goal is to be able to handle 80 grams per hour, then you ingest 80 grams per hour during 1 workout a week. And the second part of this is, and this is ideal circumstances, is that you include the duration too. Because what your gut can tolerate for a couple hours may not extend without actual exposure to additional hours. So if we use a gravel A race as an example, in a perfect world, you do your 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever time you think you're going to be out there based on your fitness, the duration of the course, the topography, all that, at 60 or 75 or 90 grams per hour weekly. You expose yourself to this once a week, but Oscar recognizes, and I recognize this isn't always realistic. So in that case, his recommendation is to apply slightly higher intensity to shorter workouts. So for example, instead of 3 hours at 75% of your FTP, you do 2 hours at 80 of your FTP. Or if you're doing a sweet spot workout where the repeats are at 88%, knowing you'll race at 75%. Okay. All while using your intended event day fueling plan. Because this looks like it might bring about similar physiological effects and it might bring about similar psychological effects. And when we talk about psychological in this context, we're talking about RPE, which brings me to my final topic and what I think might be another overlooked aspect of gut training, and that's fullness perception. And remember, we did talk about this a long time ago. Nate mentioned it. It's well known that the stomach can extend, and over time we can simply get used to it. It simply will allow us to contain more food. We can actually train the stomach to hold more content. And this is all good and fine when we're sitting at the dinner table, but a full stomach can harshly impact performance if you're unaccustomed to the sensation. You know, if you're not used to that same full stomach while training or competing. So consider training to reduce this perception of fullness by making fullness more tolerable. And you do it through exposure to things like training after a meal, drinking excess water prior to a workout, anything that distends the gut, the stomach specifically, and even more or simply different in-workout carbohydrate. So for instance, if you're hooked on fluids, maybe you try gels. Hooked on gels, maybe you try, or used to gels, maybe you try blocks or bars. If all you do is blocks or bars, maybe you try whole foods, maybe you just try a little more blocks and bars. All crude, but effective and sometimes necessary adaptation techniques.
I have some theories that I think are wrong, but they're worth considering. Y'all ready for them?
Ooh, these are my favorites. You have no science to back this up, but you're going to say something.
Science. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that people screw up nutrition by taking in complicated nutrition. I think that there's fly in the ointment in the form of salted watermelon flavor, or insert some sort of flavor, some sort of strange thing. You're eating waffles instead of just taking in sugar. And I think that this is probably very easy to test with science. And it would be fantastic to see if you get 80 grams per hour through the form of waffles and bars and other things versus 80 grams of hour just through sugar. And to have athletes that are already adapted to taking in that sort of rate and seeing what the change is. Because
there's science.
What's that?
There is science. I'll tell you.
Yeah. Because the fact is, like, it's looking at it from a distilled perspective. If all you need is X plus Y, why in the world are you adding in the extras? And if it comes down to something like, flavor or palate fatigue or anything else, I'm sorry if this sounds a bit harsh, but what in the world, like, where does palate fatigue or preference, how does that fit into your race plan? That's like a small pickiness that's getting in the way of hours and hours and hours of training and execution.
It does in some contexts, but in like something like an ultra endurance event where you can't bring yourself to eat because you can't stomach the idea of ingesting another one of the salted watermelon isotonic gel, then if you're not going to eat, then it's going to have to be something else. But
John's
this
point
is a specific context. I mean, many hours on end.
I love this topic. John's like, imagine if I were to say, I only like Michelin star food on the bike. You'd be like, that's silly. I'm like, I can't stomach anything else. So the idea there is, which Chad just said, there is a point for everybody that they can't eat something anymore. And I think John's saying is like HTFU kind of thing of just like,
yes,
get through it. And there's science that the solid stuff does not work as well as the more liquid or gel stuff, like for absorption rates. But totally, if you do all liquid, and some people will just have distress even with training. So it's your mileage may vary, and you should look at it. But I think we should strive with all the things we do, strive to do the liquid or gel and liquid, depending on the race and the heat and all that sort of thing, to get there if you can. And when you say pure sugar, I think John too is talking about what the correct ratio of fructose to
glucose,
maltodextrin. Yeah, exactly. And that is there is some research. What was it, 2 to 1? And it might be a different ratio. And there's more research coming out.
It's 1.8.
1.8. Yeah, 1
currently, right? So this is all pretty new stuff. So it could be different. And if you're experiencing better performance that is like slightly different than that, I would, pay attention to that and go for it, and not just say it has to be this. And if it's any more than this, in my brain, I'm going to like throw up or something like that. So is that your point, John? Is that put some effort into this?
Yes, you have to. But I think that I want to hit this home. that gel that you're taking in that's like birthday cake flavor or hop flavor, I don't know. Don't think that the flavor is just free and has no impact and consequence. Artificial flavorings, whatever, thickenings, colorings, all that stuff. I have no clue if they affect it, but what's the point of taking them in when they could possibly, potentially adversely affect your nutrition? Because I see a lot of athletes, a lot of them, they send me messages all the time on Instagram and say, I don't know how you feel with 80 grams per hour. It's impossible. When I take in this sort of stuff, here's what I took in. And they show it's like this colorful array of gels that have all these crazy flavors or waffles or cubes and all this other stuff. And then I challenge them to say, just take in glucose and fructose. That's it. Like get rid of all the other stuff. And in every
that's actually becoming easier to do. We're in the midst of a shift, which is really favoring this whole higher carbohydrate intake, where gels are now 30 grams, more, concentrated gels are 60 grams. You can put 80 grams in your bottle and it still actually tastes reasonable. There is a shift. It's not you have to eat 8 gels over the course of an hour if you want to be able to take in 90 grams of carbohydrate anymore. So it's shifting that direction.
My point isn't gel. My point isn't the number of gels. My point is get rid of all the junk that like you think that you need to take in a gel because it's like I know, but get rid of the flavoring, get rid of all that stuff. Yeah, it's all space food. Just distill it. Because I think there's a lot of misattribution where athletes are like, can't feel, can't do it, or my gut blew up. And that must have been the fact that I was fueling too much or I was dehydrated or something else. And when you look at it, they took in a cornucopia of random things that weren't just sugar. Like there's all these other things that add to it. And once again, I have no science to back this up. These are half-cocked theories that I have that are probably wrong. But in personal experience, this is absolutely what I've had. And I think it's worth considering for athletes. If you are having issues with this, get rid of the junk and simplify it. Like you can buy glucose and fructose. Like people buy the Gatorade powder and then they're locked into a sodium content that they're adding in when they could just add that sodium in separately. Like why buy the Gatorade powder? You can buy it for bulk cheaper if you just get glucose and fructose and add in your own salt. Sorry, personal thing. Very frustrating to me to see athletes misattribute these nutrition choices and see the effect on their performance and then think that it's something else that it isn't.
John, I am the biggest robot when it comes to training. And there are some flavors though that I get excited to eat and do not impact my stomach at all. And honey stinger waffles in general, I just like eating those, but the pink lemonade chews, man, on a long race, like even like Leadville, I literally get excited to eat those things. So I'm saying if you don't have distress, I think what John's saying is you have distress, try going plain, try going no added anything and making your own bottles and then see what happens there, which is a great point because you're eliminating variables, right? To see if you can actually do it. And then to Chad's point, train over time and slowly make those increases. And when you do get stuck, maybe back off a little bit and stay there for a while and then increase after that. And training indoor on the bike is a great thing for that because you can be very systematic about it. And you can have a constant temperature. You can know what the intensity of the workout is. And you can, have the specific ice cold bottle inside. Mm-hmm. We actually tried this for a while. We don't have enough time, but the nutrition industry in general, those powders are so expensive for what they are.
For what they are, but it's still a whole lot cheaper than buying packaged product or anything else that's like pre-made into nutrition product.
I'm just going to say we went a little bit into making our own powder because I was just frustrated that I was spending all this money on the mix, but then in bulk, I don't know. It's like for what you would get in one package, you get like a pound of it. And I didn't understand what the difference was. And we talked with Pete. Pete's like, what we should do is have the like a separate sodium thing that you can add yourself that you would scoop in so you can make the correct dosage each one. So we don't really have enough time to do it, but if somebody else wants to do it, you could be a direct to consumer, inexpensive nutrition product like that. If you do distribution online and I don't know, maybe we'll still do it someday, but I think it's needed. And I do think some flavoring would be good, John, depending on the
taste of speed, man. If you don't like the taste of speed, that's okay. But don't expect to go fast.
But you should offer a plain one too, right?
Always. And the whole motivation behind that particular flavor, the salted watermelon, was because I stumbled upon something that actually tasted good and I did like to eat. That it was something coming from a perspective of someone who could eat a couple gels and experience gastric distress. I finally found something that at least made me want to experience that gastric distress. I knew it was coming, but at least it could taste a little better in the process.
Wait, is this actually you, Chad? Did you actually write this?
No. He has no clue what he's talking about.
Oh yeah,
he's
I fell
just
apart.
guessing. Yeah, he's just
I thought
guessing.
it was a guess.
I missed it.
It's Chaz. Ivy, do you have anything to add to this? I'm sorry, I've dominated this one. Or we have.
I like to eat candy. I don't know, man.
We need that as a meme. Like Ivy's face, it just says, I like to eat candy.
Yeah.
It really works for her.
I've for sure overthought it and spent money on stuff that I didn't need to, when ultimately Swedish fish in bulk from Costco has worked great for me. And eating food, making little rice cakes. And that's been super solid for me. Sorry.
Especially for your bikepacking trip you just did.
Oh yeah. The bikepacking trip was sick because it was 4 days and super loaded down heavy bikes. We had all the food, like dinner, lunch stuff we need. And so all of our stops were just for in ride fuel, getting more water and like ride snacks. So we were super loaded down, really heavy bikes, and did over 16,000 feet of climbing in the North Sierras. And each day was like six-ish hours. It was so hard. But it was great that every time we got to stop at a gas station, just get to eat pure junk. It was amazing. I loved it so much. And it only backfired once when I was super dehydrated and had pretty similar gut issues to what Chaz was describing.
Already slipped there.
Doctor, go ahead. I'm sorry, Abby. Go ahead.
No, that's it.
Dr. Poljagar, he loves Harbro gummies, right? And isn't he working with a pro cycling team?
Yeah,
and he was having them
or Hansgrohe.
Yep.
Yeah, and he's having them eat that too. So that, like, he's been on the podcast.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah. But I would just he is a really great resource who is a high-end cyclist himself. Like, he is super fast, who applies these, who tests himself. His Instagram, you learn a ton, and doing some cutting-edge research, and then advising the top people in the world. It's pretty cool to see him as a resource, and you can message him. And I can't say for sure, but I bet you he'll respond. He just loves to teach and learn and grow from all this stuff. It's pretty cool. I'm glad he's a person in the world.
Indeed. Tim's question. Tim says, "Hey, TrainerRoad crew, I love everything you do. My question is about peak power. I recently did a stomps style workout outdoors on a day when I didn't have a lot of time to ride. And when I got home, I was looking over my power data as I fought the urge to vomit and noticed that my peak power during the stomps was only about 70% of my peak power that I have generated in the past while already at a high speed. Is this normal, or is this an indication that I have something to work on? Should I be doing more stomps or weight training to work on muscle recruitment? Or could it be a problem with stability in the hips, knees, and core that only makes manifest when trying to put out a ton of power from that standing position? Just trying to figure out if this is normal or if there is something I need to add to my growing list of things to work on. Thank you for the help. Keep up the fantastic work." Before you jump in, Nate, Chad, can you describe what stomps are so then we all have even context to start from?
They're typically done from a stop or a near stop. You can be clipped in and just bring it to your slowest, almost track stand speed. And then it's you're already in the highest gear you can turn over. And that turnover could be, 10 revolutions a minute in the early stages of it. And then you wind it up to some predetermined RPM. Typically, you cut it off when you hit 90 sort of thing, or when you spin out the gear.
And
so
I want to go to
high force work, hands in the drops, every bit of force that you can muster, leg to 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 leg.
Yeah, high force, low RPM. Ivy, you did track racing. Like, when did you?
Like Kieran starts specifically, where everyone is lined up on the start line and you're waiting for the moto to go by, and you're kind of racing to see. One person has to be the first. Nobody wants to be the first one on the moto, but everyone else is kind of racing and jockeying for like second or third position that they want. So doing those stomps is an important part of training for this.
See, what you're describing is mustering that same force at high revolution, though, which is, I think, the crux of the issue here. Is he talked about being able to generate higher force and max force output when he's already spinning at, I don't know if the RPMs were mentioned. No, but either way, there is a distinct difference between the two.
Yeah. And I want to ask this, Ivy, I don't know if you had a power meter on your track bike. It's actually not that common all the time for athletes to have that. So I don't know if you ever were able to see this. We're like, oh, my stomp sprint power is lower than my normal sprint power.
Well, it was something that I did on the road for sure as well.
Did you notice this same decrease with your stomps?
Yeah, of course, because the very initial part of this effort is the important thing to keep in mind about these is that they're so inefficient. You're so inefficient when you're coming from a standstill and you're not recruiting the rest of your body in the way that you do need to get that peak sprint power. You're not going to make as much power as you would otherwise. But then, you're continuing that effort. And in theory, you should reach that peak power later, but you're not. You just blew an enormous number of matches to get on top of the gear from a standstill. So this is not the setting in which you should expect to see your peak power.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a super good point. And it's easy to forget that power is the product of force and speed.
Speed, exactly.
Not just force. It feels super powerful, right? When you are just like
it's
in that
forceful
huge gear when you start.
It's hugely forceful, but it's not hugely powerful. That power comes later when you couple it with speed.
When you look at
it's the RPM. So not speed. If you think
that's what we're talking
bike.
about. Yeah.
I know, but I just want to clarify everybody. It's your cadence.
Yes. Great clarification.
Torque
Correct.
plus cadence. Yeah.
Yeah. Just think about how
moving speed has nothing to do with it. It's all about the leg speed that we're talking about.
Yeah. Just think about how slow those first revolutions are. I mean, we're talking seriously 10 RPM sort of stuff, trying to get it going. There's a heck of a lot of force, but it's being distributed over a really long pedal revolution.
If you watch Justin and Corey Williams when they sprint versus watching somebody like me when I sprint, there are many differences in our sprinting ability and our technique, and I'm far inferior. But one of the main differences that I see is that I typically sprint with a lower cadence than they do. They sprint really fast. Have you noticed that too, Ivy, with like the best sprinters that you've raced with? Fast sprinters are able to do it at a really high RPM. It's
why I've had success as a sprinter. It doesn't necessarily come down to just raw power, like how fast can you turn the pedals over at a high gear and a high
and continue to turn them over
speed. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's that high cadence is a part that I think all of us miss because we focus on the force, because the force feels powerful, but then we miss the boat in terms of, well, your goal isn't to create force. Your goal is to create power.
Force is not power. Just get clear on that. I've seen so many people lose sprints, and it's usually amateur riders, entry-level riders, where they put it in the gear that they should finish in, but they're starting in that gear and they just telegraph the entire sprint and everyone leaves them.
Yeah, it's true. Everyone can tell. Well, you spend 5 seconds to get up to speed. Yeah.
And everyone else is gone.
I've made that mistake so many times and I still will probably. Nate, we did the Sprinting 101 video. You can check that out on YouTube, where we had a horrific experience when your chain popped off because of flex in your chain. Near
horrific. You saved it.
Yeah, I'm still traumatized, actually.
It was horrific.
Yeah, it was scary enough. Nate, do you have thoughts that you want to share on this one? I mean, first of all, I guess
I do.
For Tim,
of course.
Tim, you shouldn't expect to have high power like Ivy said. That's answering one of your questions, the core question there. But Nate, your thoughts?
Yeah, I have been sprinting wrong my whole life, and I didn't realize it until during COVID when Amber said something about trying to increase her cadence in a sprint as fast as possible, and that was your goal. The whole time that I would try to sprint is I would try to pull up on the bars and push down on the pedals as fast, as forcefully as I could. And what it would do is it would be like an up and down thing. And I'm y'all don't know, I'm not a totally weak person. I can do like 305 deadlift 10 times in a row, and it's not that bad. So it's stronger than most cyclists to do that. Not strong. I mean, there's a lot of people who are way stronger than that. And to demonstrate this, in that sprinting video, we were doing that where we'd slow down. I was trying to put as much torque just at that one pull up and push down, right? Not a circle, do that. And I bent my chain ring. Like, to tell you that is, and you saw John afterwards, I physically bent it by how much power I put out. Yes. But my peak watts, 1200, I think I've hit like 1290. And that's because the difference between torque and power, I was focused on as much torque as possible. And I was putting a heck of a lot of torque down to break a chainring, but the power I was not focusing one bit on trying to have cadence as fast as possible. And that torque through an entire revolution. And when you talk about Pete and Amber, they talk about how you move your handlebars and how they would talk about this kind of motion thing about where the pressure on your handlebars would change inside of where your pedals are inside of that cadence. And I never understood it until I heard Amber talk about trying to accelerate your cadence in a sprint. And then that makes perfect sense, because where I'm putting that power out changes, and how I'm going to leverage myself against the bars is going to change too. And if you watch the sprinting video, like I'm a weak back with that kind of deadlift, but I'm all flexy while I'm sprinting, right? My butt's moving around. Pete's like this solid, like piece of iron. And again, if you are thinking about it where you have like 2 phases of torque and the rest is almost relaxation, that is, my body gets tight and then loose, tight, then loose, tight, then loose, rather than that whole time where I am stabilizing myself against the bars and having constant tension and trying to increase that cadence. Unfortunately, like during COVID, there was no racing, and I was, TrainerRoad, COVID, focus on the business. And I did mountain biking then. So all my outside riding was mountain biking for Cape Epic. I have not tested this theory of myself, but I'm just going to assume I've got a 15, 16, 1700 watt sprint. That is possible.
It's fair. Go ahead. PR yourself.
I'm just going to say it. I don't have any science to, that's what I can do. I just choose not to. Maybe one day I'll show you, but I so can't wait to do that and try that. So that's why, again, the stomps, it's like, I think a lot of people do this too, is the same as me. You've seen people do it too, right, Chad? Like they pull up on the bars as hard as possible. And it's almost like they're trying to climb stairs rather than pedal a bike. It's like, how can I jump up these stairs one at a time, then have this smooth motion of acceleration? It's not sprinting.
It's training for sprinting. And it's not even training for sprinting per se. It's training to improve how much muscle mass you can recruit. It's only aimed at improving the neural capacity, the neural end of things. Yeah, exactly. The communication of the brain to the muscles. That's what it's about. It's not about generating big numbers. It's not about teaching you how to sprint well. It's about reinforcing that communication so that you can then apply it to all the things you want to do when you sprint.
It's still an important skill to have. I mean, Ivy, you mentioned the fact that why you're good at sprinting is because you can sprint at high speed, but I bet you can also sprint well at low speed because of all the work you've done with that. Low leg speed we're talking about, not moving speed. Like relatively speaking, compared to most other people, because there's
okay at it, better at high speed for sure.
Because that's like the reality is sometimes you're caught in a bad gear, or sometimes you need to, I don't know, like it happens, but the benefits of having that neuromuscular connection transcend just low RPM. They go all the way across to high RPM too. It's really, really good.
And the best sprinters, it depends on the race. Actually, lower categories, this is more of an issue, but you need that high cadence because your speed increases so much that you'll have to shift, and it'd be incredibly hard to shift in a sprint. And in a low category race, the entry speed to that sprint is usually a lot slower, and you might have to shift up. Where at like the high level sprints, like the person in front is already putting out 1,000 watts in that lead out, and you're already going like 35 miles per hour, and they might sprint to 40. But there's times too I've did it where you start at like 22, right? Everyone's slow, and you got to like click, 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 and that's, again, good shifting, good equipment, not a stretch chain. That helps too, to be able to shift during those sprints. That's its own thing. Shifting during a sprint, it's hard to do.
Faster sprints, if you're coming off fast lead out, you probably already have your gear. Then it's all just about revolutions, how quickly you can wind up from 110 to 130 and hold at 130 sort of business. But with lower category, or just maybe just a sprint where you find yourself not in the gear that you want to be in, you do have to shift. It is a skill that's necessary to learn. If you want to be a competent sprinter, you have to be able to shift any number of times. It's not going to be a high number of shifts. It'll be 1 or 2, 3 if you really botched it. But it is something that's worth knowing.
It's true. Yep.
Let's get into This is a good podcast. I want to jump on the bike. Right.
Let's get into Marcus's question, and it's the last one, but this has to do with sprinting too, and it's a more strategic question rather than technical question. Hey guys, love the podcast and TrainerRoad. I follow your low volume plans, and supplementing it with group rides and longer rides has taken my FTP from 180 to 280 in 18 months or so. Way to go.
That is amazing. Amazing.
Incredible improvement, right? Yeah.
55%. That's a lot.
Way to go, Marcus. And Ivy, I want to go to you first on this one because I'm really interested in the tactical perspective on this. I have a simple racing tactics question. In a rolling road race with a reduced sprint, I've heard the phrase, quote, if in doubt, lead out. I'd like to know your thoughts on this in a situation where I might be the strongest sprinter of a small breakaway group, with riders being cagey and no danger of being caught at the finish by the main peloton. Thanks, guys. So reiterating, reduced group in a road race, they aren't in danger of being caught. And in this case, we have Marcus being the strongest rider. So does the saying, if in doubt, lead out apply in this case, Ivy, or what do you think of that saying?
Teammates or no teammates for Ivy's response? Are there teammates in the breakaway?
No.
Let's say no teammates.
I'd assume no. I'd assume no. Yeah.
Yeah, let's say no.
Being the strongest sprinter doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to win it. And I think that people that win races all the time beat sprinters that are better than them because they're smarter. I do not like the phrase, if in doubt, lead it out at all.
No. No.
I don't think I've ever done that. Even if I have been like far and above the best sprinter. And Marcus needs to practice their sprint so many times over and over in training at different speeds, starting at slow speeds. Like we're talking about practicing sprinting or shifting during your sprint, because it might be a scenario where if it's a reduced group and it gets to that point where people are kind of looking at each other and you're almost at a standstill because no one wants to lead it out, but you're running out of room, it might be a scenario where there's such a short distance to the finish that whoever does lead it out might end up winning because you've waited so long. And so that's why Marcus needs to practice their sprint so much. I think like the Williams were saying that they sprint like thousands of times per season. That's ambitious for amateurs. But knowing exactly how you respond from different speeds at different distances. I mean, seeing that there's only, 100-ish meters left because you've been watching each other and, knowing that you do really well from that speed, knowing what it feels like to, edge out a sprint for just that distance. You can apply, all right, I know what I can do for this much, and I know how much faster someone else would have to be with this amount of space to come around me. So you might need to take control. So there are too many different scenarios at the end of a race to tell you, yes, you should do it. No, you shouldn't do it. And the answer is you need to practice and know yourself and know exactly how you sprint so that you can apply it at the end of a race.
Well said, Ivy. Well said.
Can
I just share one quick thing, Nate? Like I'm thinking of Mark Cavendish.
I'm CEO. It's my turn. I haven't talked enough during this. Just kidding. Go ahead, John.
I'm thinking of Mark Cavendish, who, by the way, just amazing British national championships race.
So
like
good.
If you haven't watched the final 50 Ks of that, it's incredible. But first of all, one of the greatest sprinters. I can't think of in fact, I can't think of a single chance. Chad, you are a purveyor of races, so perhaps you have a better memory of this. Can't think of a single race where Cav has been the first one to sprint. Like he's just opened it up for everybody. And I've never
seen him do it from the front ever. At the end of a race where he worked hard, but even with an entire team, if he found himself caught out, I've never seen him in the front of the field take on the sprint from the front of the field and pull it off.
No, he always and I bet that Mark still could have won plenty of races if he was the first one to go because he's an incredible sprinter, but he still didn't. That I think that says something like to the strategic and also one thing about Mark, he's one of the best high speed sprinters in the world. Low speed, not quite as much, but high speed because of his aerodynamic advantage, right?
But that scenario underlines exactly what Ivy just said. And there's just too many variables for there to be a catch-all phrase, if in doubt, lead out. It's too simplistic in an environment where things are far too variable.
I like something
Yeah.
you'd say to trick someone to leading you out. But
Yeah. This
Who
is
told you that?
This is what the Masters racer that's been winning for 10 years in your local area tells everybody, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Big wink. Nate, your thoughts?
Yeah. So it is, it's going to depend on the race and the, sorry, the attrition and how tired everyone is. Because if there are those races where you're in a breakaway, but everyone's pretty fresh at the end. And then there's those races where at the end, everyone is trashed. And this could be a crit. I can think of some crits that are hilly that are like this with a breakaway, or this could be in a rolling road race. Could be anything. And in my experience, if it is the end of a race, a lot of times when people are tired and there's no teammates, the first person to go often does win. I can think of that, not Nevada City, where it's like over by Auburn. Did you do it, John, where there's like that really fast downhill?
I haven't done it, but I know the course. I've watched your race analysis video. It's fantastic on it.
Yeah. If there's I actually just on Instagram too, I saw a highlight from an old Sagan thing where there was a short climb leading into a sprint. He was the first to go. You know, people are tired. They look at each other for that half second. If there was a little bit of a climb into the finish, I would sprint into that climb. You get that little bit of gap where everybody looks at each other, because if you sprint right on the climb, everyone's going to go with you. But if you do a little bit ahead of time, everyone's waiting for that next person to make a reaction. And that little bit of separation can be enough, because then it can be the half second can turn into 2 or 3 seconds because everybody is waiting for somebody else to go. Mm-hmm. And the person that does cover it might not be fast enough. Have you ever done that where somebody does try to cover, but the gap increases and you're like, oh no, like this person is actually not the wheel I want to follow. They're just really super tired, even though they're trying it.
I think those scenarios largely come down to motivation too. Not entirely motivation, but there's a huge motivation component, because you'll see the same tactics play out at just a stage of the Tour de France, which is important, don't get me wrong, but versus a world championship or a national championship where it's never say die. Someone goes, it's covered. Someone goes, it's covered. Someone goes, it's covered every time. The scenarios don't work when everybody wants it that badly, because everyone's willing to just completely annihilate themselves going after the only thing that matters, which is that national or world title. But in other races, I see that happen all the time. People look at each other because it's just not as of great as importance.
It just happened in the last few years. What was was it Valverde? Who won world championships where it's like a group of 3 and the first person who sprinted out of that group did win?
And that could have been the attrition that you just described. By the point he hits that final hit, there have been so many flurries from each of those riders, so many riders jumping and then someone covering. It doesn't ever come down to 3 riders rolling into the last 5K and then one rider jumps and no one covers. That's such a rare scenario.
It's not no one covers, is they looked at each other for that half second for the other person to go because they were tired. That's all it, like they do chase eventually, but it's that look at each other. And I've had the same thing too, where I've been in the breakaway and they look at each other. I mean, I look at other people.
It's a moment's hesitation.
It's the moment's hesitation. Yeah. And if I'm saying is if they're tired, that moment's hesitation is more likely to happen. Where if they aren't tired, like there's no moment's hesitation and it just gets covered.
Sure.
Ivy, what do you have thoughts on the hesitation aspect of it, or using like a feature leading into a finish like that?
Yeah. Specifically if this is a rolling road race scenario that Marcus is talking about, you might be in one of those scenarios where you are the only sprinter to make it over that last climb in this reduced group with a bunch of climbers, in which case are people that categorize themselves as climbers and don't practice sprints in the ways that you will. And if you do know yourself and know that you can, if you're the kind of sprinter that can have a really quick initial acceleration and create a space quickly, and you're with people that you know don't practice sprinting a lot, don't consider themselves sprinters and don't work on it, they won't know what to do in that initial moment. And you can kind of force their hand in hesitation to, especially when it's slow and people are looking at each other, to be like, oh no, what do we do? Like, this isn't going to be a slow, they're going to wind up speed and then eventually start sprinting and we can just follow them. You can catch them off guard and really make a quick acceleration and kind of force their hesitation and make space.
Yeah. I think your original advice, Ivy, of like knowing yourself and knowing what your skills are in sprinting and what your weaknesses are, absolutely has to be the governing principle. Yeah, it only comes through practice, right? And if you know yourself really well, then you can see those scenarios and you can say, it's not an absolute rule of if in doubt, lead out. Because to be frank, I think there will always be doubt in a sprint. You'll never, it's never going to be, predetermined that you're going to win. So Nate, yeah.
Sorry, I'm interrupting a lot because I get so excited. It's one of my many character flaws. Instead of if in doubt, lead out, I would say like if in doubt, like pop or attack or something. Because lead out makes me think that you're going to stretch everyone out and it's going to be like this train. If you really don't know what's going to happen and it's small, like I do like the idea of being more aggressive but popping, creating distance, going from the back to the front, sort of stuff. You have no plan. You don't know what's going to happen. You might not even know where the finish is exactly. How many times does that happen? You don't know where the finish is. Someone else goes and you go and you're like, oh gosh, the finish is so much closer than I thought it was. And you get so disappointed because you had something inside of you. You had all this energy. That's happened to me like a Boca Road race. I can never figure out where that freaking finish line is. And someone always goes and I'm like, oh, it's here already.
Yeah.
Does that happen to y'all? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I want to share a counterpoint. I always want, I think that patience is a strength of mine. And I want to exercise that. And I want to leverage other people's lack of patience. If I can get one person to make a dumb move before me making a dumb move, that's one less person I have to worry about. And all it takes is me just waiting a bit more. I have to be really vigilant to make sure I stay on that wheel and I'm prepared to go. But if they make the move first, that's still just going to be beneficial to me. Now, if you're within like 100 meters of the line and it's not like some steep uphill finish, then clearly you need to get busy and get going, right? But when we're talking about something that's, if you're coming into a finish in this scenario, you have a lot of different chances in front of you in terms of the riders in front of you to make poor decisions and to sprint too early. And if you aren't the one that goes early, somebody else will fill that void and they will be the one that goes too early in almost every situation. So it's letting somebody, it's reducing. We all have pressure. We all feel like we need to make the move, but everybody else is feeling that too. It's not just you. Like everybody coming into a sprint finish feels like, when are they going to go? When should I go? I should go. I'm running out of time. So if you can just let that marinate a bit longer, it's going to help you in most cases. So my natural reaction, if I'm going to have an absolute rule, is the opposite of this. Ivy, you had something?
Oh, no. I mean, I did have some, I might give away my sneaky tips about riders that are hesitating in a sprint, but go ahead.
No,
you finish.
Okay. I'm done. I want to hear the sneaky tips.
Okay. I'm going to reveal my secrets. Okay. If there are riders that are hesitating and looking at each other and they're moving really slowly, I have this sneaky trick where I get other people to initiate the sprint by getting in the drops and kind of jumping out of the saddle for just a little second. And it's not a huge effort and you're kind of faking it and they think, oh, it's go time, we're going. And then once they start going, they're not going to be like, oh wait, they're not actually sprinting, I should sit back down. They're committed and they'll go and you can trick them.
That is amazing.
Nate's mouth is agape.
Yeah.
That is, I'm going to sign up for a race this weekend just to try that. That is such a good idea, especially if you're a marked rider and they're like, because you get
because you can get out of the saddle and posture like you're about to sprint without actually starting the effort, right?
You could do 3 strokes and then let them go by.
Alaphilippe has employed that pretty regularly. I've seen him do that. I mean, he'll signal. Yep, he'll signal long ahead with like tightening up his shoes, and then when he gets done, and he's always really dramatic in the way he moves on a bike too. So when you see him move like that, he does it so often. But coming into a sprint finish, it's like really tough to tell, like if it's like him sprinting or not. And it's not worth gambling at that point. Like you're just going to go off instinct. If somebody is sprinting, you're going to move. It's clever.
But he also goes early all the time, right? He'll pop from the group before anyone else does. Yep. So that's the best part, is that you don't know what he's going to do.
That's why he's such a good racer. He's incredible. Yeah.
And then the other thing, if you're reading the group and you feel like a K and a half or something before the sprint. If you feel like, it's going to be one of those things where you're like almost track standing next to each other. So nobody wants to lead it out. If you can anticipate that those are the riders that you're going to be with, try to be at the back, super far out, way before you get to that point. And then once you're at that point, when the other riders are hesitating, slow rolling, looking at each other, give yourself some space, let yourself drop back 2 or 3 bike lengths, start your sprint. And this isn't when in doubt, lead it out. This is when in doubt, be the first person to sprint. And that looks like dropping back a few bike lengths, starting your acceleration really hard. And then by the time you pass them, you've caught them off guard. They're looking at each other and you're moving many times faster than they are, and they won't be able to get on your wheel. So those
Vanderpool does that. Vanderpool, and I don't know how like he has to be the most smart rider on earth, right? Like you think, but he, even at Amstel Gold, like no one thought that he was going to be in for the win. And he sprinted earlier than what everybody else expected. And that's the best finish to a bike race I've ever seen. And he's done that quite a lot, where he kind of drifts back, like you're saying, Ivy. He kind of like disconnects from the group, and then he might even drift to the side a little bit and just to get a little bit of separation. And then that way they snap and they have momentum, and it's really tough to latch on.
And he's got a jump that can win from the front. So when he initiates that jump from behind, you're done.
How excited are you all for the tour to see all this stuff happening?
So excited tomorrow.
I cannot wait. It's going to be so great. I'm so glad he's racing. At first I didn't know with him racing the Giro like he did, but oh my gosh, this is going to be so much fun. I can't wait.
Y'all brought up the 2 points I wanted to say is that attack, Ivy, what you just said from the back, 100% if it is going slow, right? Like if it's going really slow, if it's going like 35, like really 35 is probably 25, 30, it's really hard to be in that position because you got to make up those bike links while overcoming aerodynamic drag. And that I have talk about Vanderpool, you could use me as an example. There is a race analysis video.
I mean, they're super similar. I've always thought that. Yeah.
It was like a 35 plus 4-5 race or something. I got me to 3. So
Jonathan's comparing himself to the Williams brothers, and now we got Nate going for that. Wow.
Hey, you know what it is the same tactics.
Humility is the theme here, Chad. Yeah.
No. The same tactics work at a Tour de France best in the world level and at a 35 plus 4-5 level. Like these are just tactics in general.
Sure.
And this is a race where it was I forget what the crate is, but it's I went from the back. You saw me have this huge gap, and they were all looking at each other because it was the last lap and no one wanted to lead it out. And I went over them, and I think I don't know if I still had it, but I had the Strava fastest lap of anyone ever on that thing, even with like Cat 1 racers and stuff in a peloton, because I got that speed going into it. And the other part I want to say is, what John said about letting that other person go, is to Ivy's point, is know your power profile. Because John has pop, I do not have pop. So if somebody like John pops, like John, we've sprinted next to each other. You'll always gap me by like 2 or 3 bike lengths, right? Yeah. And but I have really good sustained power. So with Ivy's technique, knowing this, that works really well for me to go from the back, get that high speed, and then sustain it, because the gap gets created from going to the back to the front. And if you're also going to the back, don't do a bunch of chinks like dunk, 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 dunk. They'll hear you, right? Coming
shifts. Yeah.
Make sure you get in the right like gear way earlier before you do that, and lower your cadence in order to be able to go up. And even coming up, shifting, people can hear that, and that can be another sign of doing it. And if you are not a marked rider, this stuff works so much better. If there's one more point. There's great people, or there's another sprinter in the group, and you are not an air quotes sprinter, that's when you go. Like if they don't think you can sprint, go early, because they're going to look at the sprinter to cover, because they don't want to drag the sprinter up. And that's how you get the little hesitation to create the separation.
Yep. Ivy just critiqued me on that in our most recent race analysis. Well, not most recent, but the one most recent with me. And she was like, hey, look, you're going to waste a lot of energy with this attack. And there are riders looking behind them in front of you. And the rider behind you got into his drops and shifted into position. He was just ready to go because I was just signaling to everybody, hey, everybody, raise the flag. I'm going to attack. So fantastic podcast. Thanks, y'all. We went long. I hope that if you like long episodes, you're super happy today. If you like short episodes, I've got a hack. You can listen to it in chunks. It's amazing. It makes it like multiple short episodes.
Wow.
I know. Yeah. Pretty good. So if you want to join Ivy and I on a pre-ride for the Tahoe Trail 100 course, it doesn't matter if you're racing or not, by the way. You can ride that course the week ahead of time and just join us for it. If you want to do that, it'd be super fun to have you. We'll be July 8th on Friday at 9 a.m. at the gondola there at North Star. We'll meet and we'll do a fun lap. It'll be good times. We'll be checking out the course, not going crazy fast. But above all, if you want to get faster, go to TrainerRoad.com and sign up, rate this podcast, share it with your friends. So then it helps us continue to grow as a company. It's huge. If you're watching this video on YouTube, give it a thumbs up, like the video, subscribe to our channel, and we'll talk to you all next week. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.